Chapter 355. The yacht was right below Xianxia Peak. When the green light shot out of the yacht, it almost instantly reached the peak of Xianxia Peak. Jiang Zhengqing was standing about 4 or 5 meters away from Chen Shi. Seeing that Chen Shi had suddenly turned hostile and attacked, a half-smile suddenly appeared on his face. For someone as arrogant as Jiang Zhengqing, the only reason he didn't attack Chen Shi directly was that he wanted to retreat in order to advance. After all, Daoist Island was the territory of the Jiang clan. If he directly attacked Chen Shi, an outsider, even if he won in the end, others would think that he was bullying Chen Shi by outnumbering him and had an unfair advantage. But if Chen Shi made the first move and forced him to fight back, who would dare to say half a word of gossip? As long as he defeated Mr. Chen fair and square, he, Jiang Zhengqing, would be the undisputed #1 person in the world, enough to become the chief of the Wu Lian clan. It had to be said that Jiang Zhengqing's idea was very good. As far as Jiang Zhengqing knew, cultivators would more or less have some way to hide their aura. Just like in martial arts novels, the lighter one's footsteps were, the higher one's martial arts skills were. Because everything a cultivator owned came from the spiritual qi of heaven and earth, to estimate a person's true cultivation level, one only needed to look at the fluctuation of spiritual qi around the person. When a cultivator stood still, their aura-hiding technique could cover most of the fluctuation of spiritual qi. So even if Chen Shi didn't have any fluctuation of spiritual qi, Jiang Zhengqing didn't find it strange at all. But, when the green light streaked across the sky like a bolt of lightning, Jiang Zhengqing suddenly realized that he might have thought too simply of the situation. The green light was only 3 feet long, but in the process of flying, it was like a meteor streaking across the sky, leaving behind a slender green thread in the dusk sky. Look! What's that? The appearance of the green light immediately attracted everyone's attention. Immediately after, a sentence suddenly popped up in the minds of many well-informed Jiang clan clansmen: the peak of Taihang, flying immortal with one sword. A flying sword? This man is really Mr. Chen. Before the crowd had time to be surprised, the green light was like a bolt of lightning, striking down on Jiang Zhengqing, who was in the middle of the square. In the process of chopping down, an extremely surging wave of spirit qi suddenly erupted from the green light. Then, with the green light as the tip of the cone, a cone-shaped aura field visible to the naked eye instantly formed. However, in an instant, the green light was like a huge drill, smashing down with an unstoppable momentum. After feeling the huge amount of energy contained in the green light, Jiang Zhengqing's expression couldn't help but change slightly. He no longer looked as arrogant as before. He had really been careless this time. Seeing the ferocious green light, Jiang Zhengqing could only quickly raise his arms in an attempt to block the sword. Therefore, just as the green light was about to hit Jiang Zhengqing, a dazzling golden light immediately appeared around him. The 6 trigram lines calming mind, embracing the yuan and guarding one. From afar, Jiang Zhengqing looked like he was trapped in a golden egg. As for the green light, it was like a high-speed rotating drill bit that directly crashed into the shell of the egg. Bang! As soon as the two came into contact, an extremely dazzling light lit up the top of Xianxia Peak. The light was so bright that it almost lit up half of the sky. The collision of the moves set off an intense turbulence, so much so that a cyclone of energy suddenly appeared in the middle of the square. The cyclone spun wildly, and the strong traction force shattered everything around it. It uprooted the square's floor and the surrounding trees, and then lifted them all into the sky. Facing such a powerful wave of energy, even Jiang Yuankue had no choice but to quickly retreat into the ancestral hall, not to mention the other Jiang clansmen present. Among them, the weaker ones were almost instantly lifted into the sky by this cyclone, and then heavily smashed to the foot of the mountain. If it weren't for the protection of the Jiang clan's ancestral hall, it would probably be turned into ruins in this storm. Finally, the storm gradually subsided. Although it was still a scene of flying sand and rolling stones, and the sky was dark, some things could still be vaguely seen. Jiang Yuankue hid in the ancestral hall. At this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind: it's over. Just from the momentum of this sword, Jiang Yuankui realized that he and Jiang Yuankui might have been wrong. This Mr. Chen in front of him was definitely not a soft persimmon, and it was even more impossible for him to become a stepping stone for the Jiang clan. One had to know that no matter how he and Jiang Zhengqing fought, they were both clan relatives with the same blood flowing in their bodies, so no matter who won or lost, it was acceptable for the entire Jiang clan. But if Jiang Zhengqing was killed by Mr. Chen today, the fall of a heavenly man was unacceptable for Jiang Yuankui and even the entire Jiang clan. Therefore, after coming back to his senses, Jiang Yuankui almost instantly rushed out of the ancestral hall, and then shouted toward the square, "Stop! It's all a misunderstanding. Please stop, both of you. Let's talk nicely," Jiang Yuankui roared at the top of his lungs. He was really afraid that the two of them would really fight to the death, and if they really had to fight to the death, how would he end it then? However, when the energy dissipated and the dust settled, Jiang Yuankui suddenly realized, Jiang Zhengqing was actually still flying around the square. As for that green light, it was like a cat playing with a mouse, hanging behind Jiang Zhengqing at a distance, and from time to time, it would stick to Jiang Zhengqing to scare him. What was going on? Jiang Yuankui was stunned by what was happening in front of him. The reality was not what he thought at all. How was this a lose-lose situation? Looking at the situation, it seemed that second granduncle was beaten up unilaterally. In fact, before Chen Shi made his move, he had already set up a small illusion array around himself, so what the little fellow saw was different from what others saw. In the little fellow's eyes, the square was still the square, and the strange uncle was still the strange uncle. However, the strange uncle in front of her was like a swing, constantly floating around in the air. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but ask in confusion, "Papa, what is that uncle doing?" "Oh, look, that uncle violated the rules when he was fixing the electric pole, causing the rope at one end to loosen, so he can't maintain his balance in the air, and can only swing around in the air." "Nian Nian, don't think that this is fun, think about it, this is such a high place, what if he accidentally falls, would he be like Zhu Zi, and turn into a pile of mud? So, don't climb so high in the future, it's very dangerous, do you understand?" As Chen Shi controlled the green light to chase after Jiang Zhengqing, he did not forget to educate the little fellow. The little fellow originally thought that swinging in the air was very interesting, but after hearing Chen Shi's vivid description, a nervous expression appeared on her little face. She quickly shook her head and muttered, "I know. I don't want to climb so high." "Good girl." Chen Shi smiled and rubbed the little fellow's head, then looked at Jiang Yuankui. After looking Jiang Yuankui up and down, he suddenly laughed. "Misunderstanding?" Hearing this, Jiang Yuankui immediately nodded like he was pounding garlic, and hurriedly replied, Yes, Mr. Chen, this is all a misunderstanding, please be magnanimous." "Alright, if you say it's a misunderstanding, then it's a misunderstanding." Before Jiang Yuankui could finish his sentence, Chen Shi directly interrupted him. However, right after that, Chen Shi looked thoughtfully at Jiang Zhengqing, who was being chased by the green light, and then suddenly asked, "Leader Jiang, Daoist Island is so remote, I wonder if you've seen a movie?" "Movie? What movie?" "Young and Dangerous." Jiang Yuankui was stunned for a moment, completely unable to understand what Chen Shi was talking about. Seeing his confused look, Chen Shi did not keep him in suspense, and directly explained with a smile, "There's a line in Young and Dangerous that I really like, you have to keep your word when you're out there. If I said that I'm going to kill your whole family, then I must kill your whole family. Since I said that I'm going to send him on his way, I naturally can't go back on my words, don't you think so?" As soon as he finished speaking. Chapter 356. Jiang Zhengqing took Chen Shi's sword head-on, and his protective shield was shattered almost instantly. After the surging sword energy entered his body, Jiang Zhengqing's vitality was greatly damaged, and he almost died on the spot. If it weren't for Jiang Zhengqing's high cultivation level, and the vitality in his body was much stronger than Su Feng's, Chen Shi's sword would have sent him straight to the afterlife. After narrowly escaping death, Jiang Xianxia's first reaction was to run, as far as he could, but that green light followed him closely like a maggot in a tarsal bone, and he couldn't shake it off no matter how hard he tried. His current wretched appearance perfectly reflected those 8 words, the peak of Taixing, flying immortal with one sword. In fact, from the moment the green light appeared, the 3 words, Mr. Chen, were destined to resound throughout the cultivation world of Wuxia. Unfortunately, there were always people who thought that seeing was believing, and hearing was false. They had to witness it with their own eyes to truly understand what it meant by, when 3 people walk together, one is bound to learn from the other. Jiang Xianxia was such an example. Although Mr. Chen cut down Su Feng at the peak of Taixing, Jiang Xianxia would always think that Mr. Chen was no match for him if he hadn't fought him personally. After all, the blood of the Jiang clan flowed in his body, and he cultivated the most complete, immortal method. Su Feng was a higher diviner, after all. No matter how weak he was, he should have been able to last 3 to 5 rounds, right? But Su Feng couldn't even take one move from Mr. Chen. Jiang Xianxia admitted that he couldn't do that, so he couldn't imagine that there was someone in this world who could defeat a higher diviner with one move. How was that possible? Was there something fishy going on? Maybe it was a trap set up by Su Feng and Mr. Chen, and their purpose was to elevate Mr. Chen's status so that the entire cultivation world of Wuxia would follow his lead, just like how the leaders of the martial arts world were elected in wuxia novels. Therefore, when Jiang Xianxia heard that Mr. Chen's father-in-law had come to Daoist Island, he disregarded his status and injured Qin Yongyan. His purpose was to force Mr. Chen to show up and fight with him. To be honest, Jiang Xianxia's thought process was somewhat similar. This girl can afford such an expensive bag. She must be a mistress. He was able to open his own company at such a young age. It's all thanks to his parents. He won at the starting line from the moment he was born. Who knows what kind of shady business he's doing behind the scenes when he's earning so much money. In this regard, Chen Shi only wanted to say one thing to him: is it that difficult to admit that others are better than you? This was a fundamental difference. Even though Chen Shi had only recovered 70% of his strength, there was still a huge gap between him and Jiang Xianxia. The two of them could not be compared at all. Of course, this gap was actually the gap between Earth and Heavenly Spiral. It did not mean that Jiang Xianxia was really useless. Therefore, even though Chen Shi's cultivation had long since surpassed the entire Earth, he would not be arrogant and condescending because of this. It was better to be humble as a person. However, since Jiang Xianxia was determined to court death, Chen Shi naturally would not show mercy. Otherwise, how could he account to Ying? His father-in-law was being bullied. As a son-in-law, he naturally had to stand up for him. Therefore, no matter how Jiang Yuankue tried to smooth things over, Chen Shi turned a blind eye to it. Today, he was determined to kill Jiang Xianxia on the spot. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was, the moment the flying sword shot into Jiang Xianxia's back, a burst of white light suddenly appeared on Jiang Xianxia's body. At the same time, a deep and old voice suddenly sounded on the island. Since he is powerless to resist, I hope that Mr. Chen can be merciful on account of your wife and spare his life for the time being. After the old man's voice sounded, the bronze cauldron that had been standing in the middle of the square started to tremble slightly. Immediately after, a golden light suddenly shot out from the bronze cauldron. The light shot straight into the sky. It was as if a crack had been torn open in the dusky sky in an instant. Under the contrast of the golden light, one could even clearly see the rolling clouds in the sky. Seeing this, Chen Shi could not help but frown as he looked at the bronze cauldron in the middle of the square. A faint sneer appeared on his face. This scene. It was really similar. After the golden light shot into the sky, a fluorescent golden barrier opened up like an umbrella, instantly enveloping the 17 small islands. The sky suddenly lit up, and the array was activated. For so many years, the Jiang clan had never truly activated the array. Now that it was suddenly activated, everyone was immediately scared out of their wits, so much so that the island was full of panicked shouts. Seeing that the other party had suddenly assumed such a posture, Chen Shi gently handed the little fellow in his arms to Qin Ruoying, then waved his hand towards the sky. Then, the green light flew straight back to his hand as if it had a mind of its own. Since the other party wanted to fight, then he could only accompany them to the end. After all, it was not certain who was afraid of whom. You are the ones who are stirring up trouble, and you are also the ones who want to make peace. You dare to come to this broken place, and everything is up to you? Is there really such a good thing in the world? You can't really think, this broken array can stop me? After responding coldly to the sky, Chen Shi held the long sword in his hand and turned to look at Jiang Zhengqing, who had just fallen from the sky and was now lying on the ground, panting heavily. Because of the protection of the array, the sword just now did not directly kill him. However, it did not matter. At most, he would just follow up with another strike. Thus, Chen Shi raised his right hand and prepared to strike again. However, at this moment, the old man's voice rang out once more. The Jiang family has no intention of making you an enemy, so this array only has the effect of defense and does not have the ability to kill. This child, Zhengqing, has been arrogant since he was young. It is inevitable that he would look down on the heroes of the world. I hope that you will not lower yourself to his level, sir. The name, Yamasaro, has been passed down for a long time. I'm sure you have some experience in refining medicine. Now that rare treasures are hard to find, there are many people who want to refine a spiritual medicine but cannot find the right ingredients. Recently, there happened to be a ginseng flower on Daoist Island that has reached 500 years of age. I thought of giving this flower to you as an apology to your father on behalf of Zhengqing. I hope that you will be magnanimous and forgive him this time, ginseng flower. After hearing this, even Chen Shi could not help but be stunned. A ginseng flower that had just reached 500 years of age. Ginseng flowers were very common in Heavenly Spiral, but the rare ones were those that were exactly 500 years old. A little is not enough, but a lot is more than enough. It was not too much, not too little. Who would have thought that Daoist Island would have such a rare treasure? Perhaps it was because he had not seen anything good in a long time, but Chen Shi could not help but feel a little moved. However, after thinking about it, he still replied coldly, "Don't blame me for not showing mercy. If you want to blame someone, you can only blame yourself for being blind and hurting someone who should not have been hurt." After saying that, Chen Shi continued to walk towards Jiang Zhengqing with his sword in hand. In reality, even if Chen Shi had been injured, there was still room for negotiation for the sake of this ginseng flower. However, Jiang Zhengqing had injured Qin Yongyan. How could they continue the negotiation? There was no room for negotiation at all. Because Jiang Zhengqing's injuries were too severe, he was already in a semi-conscious state. He had no idea that death was slowly approaching him. Jiang Yuankue stood on the steps and was so anxious that he wanted to call the police, but he did not dare to stop him. He was really afraid that if Chen Shi was unhappy, he would cut him down as well. At such a critical juncture, it was obvious that only the old man whom he had never met before could stop Chen Shi. Just as expected. Just as Chen Shi was about to swing his sword, the old man's voice rang out unhurriedly. "Sir, you're actually here for your wife, right? The matter of Si Ming Xian Nu involves the secrets of our clan. It should not be mentioned to outsiders. If you're willing to let Zhengqing live, I promise to tell you everything I know." Chapter 357. What do you think? Although Daoist Island was the Jiang clan's territory, the old man was very humble, as if he was really afraid of Chen Shi. Seeing that the old man's attitude was so proper, Chen Shi stopped and began to think after listening to his words. At that moment, Qin Ruoying suddenly called out to him. "Shi," it was just a simple word, but Chen Shi immediately understood what she meant. Ying was advising him to be lenient. After all, their family was not the dragon of Kunshan, nor were they wolves, tigers, or leopards. Naturally, they would not let the Jiang clan go bankrupt because of this. It was about time. Of course, he had to listen to his wife. However, Chen-shi already had a plan in mind, so he pretended to be hesitant. Chen-shi did not say anything, so naturally, no one dared to say anything either. The dilapidated square was deathly silent. Jiang Yuankue looked at Chen-shi nervously, feeling as if his heart was about to jump out of his throat. How could there be such a terrifying person in this world? Not only Su Feng, but even second granduncle could not take a single blow from him. Could it be that this person came from the sky? Thinking of this, Jiang Yuankue could not help but look up at the cloud vortex in the sky. The golden light was still dazzling. However, he felt a chill in his heart for no reason. Could it be, the prophecy left by the ancestor really came true one day? As people often say, sometimes, it is not good to know too much. Being muddle-headed is the true meaning of life. Jiang Yuankue was clearly such an example. He looked at Chen-shi's back, but his mind was filled with distracting thoughts. After an unknown period of time, Chen-shi's voice brought Jiang Yuankue back to reality. "All right, then I will let him live. I hope you don't disappoint me." After saying this, Chen-shi suddenly waved his sleeve, and an invisible force swept up Jiang Zhengqing, then threw him directly to Jiang Yuankue. After Jiang Yuankue hurriedly caught Jiang Zhengqing, the old man's voice sounded again. "That's great. Please move to Heron Island, Mr. Chen. Yuankue, lead the way for Mr." The so-called Egret Island was actually the smallest of the 17 islands. At the same time, it was also the Jiang clan's forbidden area. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter. Under Jiang Yuankue's guidance, Chen-shi's family of 3 took a small boat to Heron Island. Apart from Jiang Yuankue, there was also the cold-faced woman from before. After Jiang Yuankue's introduction, Chen-shi found out that this woman was actually the Jiang clan's Siming Xian Nu, Jiang Yuanqing. Since Jiang Yuanqing was of the same generation as Jiang Yuankue, his age would naturally not be that young. Xian Nu of the 10,000 Holy Valley would automatically step down from her position at the age of 30. Jiang Yuanqing, a middle-aged Xian Nu woman, was able to sit firmly in the position of Xian Nu's high priestess. Just this point alone was enough to show that the Jiang clan was indeed in possession of some secrets that were unknown to others. The boat quickly approached Heron Island. As soon as they got off the boat, the little fellow's attention was immediately attracted by a few red-crowned cranes. "Papa, what's this? I think I've seen them before." As she spoke, the little fellow ran over eagerly. However, because these red-crowned cranes were too tall, she did not dare to get close. She could only stand timidly at the side, looking extremely cute. These are red-crowned cranes. You can also call them red-crowned cranes. There are only about 1,000 of them in the world. They're even rarer than pandas. Red-crowned cranes? I know. I've read about them in books. Perhaps it was because of the abundance of spirit energy on Daoist Island. These red-crowned cranes were obviously somewhat human. Seeing the little fellow approaching, not only did they not leave, but they even took the initiative to stretch their necks over. Seeing this, the little fellow could not help but reach out to touch their feathers. She was overjoyed. This child was almost bored to death on the yacht. Now that she finally found a few red-crowned cranes to play with, Chen-shi naturally had to let her have fun. Thus, Chen-shi asked for the little fellow's opinion. After confirming that the little fellow wanted to play here for a while, he handed the long sword in his hand to Qin Ruoying. He then continued to follow Jiang Yuankue to the depths of Heron Island. As a forbidden area of the clan, Heron Island was like a paradise on earth. The paths in the forest crisscrossed, and it was truly charming. Birds chirped, and colorful butterflies danced. Under the illumination of the Great Formation's golden light, the island was even more like a celestial scene with rosy clouds and lingering smoke. The center of Heron Island was not a mountain peak, but a clear lake. There was a wooden building in the center of the lake. It looked like a pavilion, but it was not a pavilion. Therefore, it looked a little like the pavilion in the middle of the lake where Ning Kaichen and Nia Shaoqian met in the movie A Chinese Ghost Story. After arriving at the bridge, Jiang Yuankui bowed to Chen Shi. He then pointed at the building in the center of the lake and said very respectfully, "The Jiang family's illustrious ancestor has been waiting for you here for a long time. It's not appropriate for me to go near, so please go ahead on your own." Chen Shi did not stand on ceremony when he heard that. He slowly walked toward the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The pavilion in the middle of the lake only had a curtain for blocking. Chen Shi waited outside the pavilion for a while. Seeing that there seemed to be no movement in the pavilion, he directly opened the curtain and walked in. As soon as he entered the room, the first thing that came into view was a table. Chen Shi raised his head to take a look. His attention was attracted by an item placed on the table. There was a soul crystal on the table. Furthermore, this soul crystal was even larger than Chen Shi's soul crystal. A little interesting. Chen Shi smiled and shook his head. Then, he sat down on the armchair. After taking a seat, he looked at the soul crystals on the table and slowly said, "I really didn't think that someone would be able to form a nascent soul under such harsh conditions. That's quite impressive, sir, you flatter me." As soon as he finished speaking, the old man's voice suddenly rang out in the room. And the source of the voice, it was none other than the soul crystal on the counter. Chen Shi did not find this strange at all. Instead, he looked at the portrait on the table with interest. Then, he smiled and asked, "Is that you?" "That's me." You were quite handsome when you were young." "Huh." The conversation came to an abrupt end. The room suddenly quieted down. It was so quiet that the sound of the wind outside could be heard. It seemed that no one wanted to speak again. In fact, since the first time Chen Shi saw this soul crystal, he understood why the old man always gave in to him. Diviners were only pseudo-cores. Only those who were above diviners could be called golden cores. So far, among all the people Chen Shi had met, except for Bai Hong's group who came down from the heavenly gate, this old man who hid Yuanying in the soul crystal in front of him had the highest cultivation. When the forest was big, there would naturally be all kinds of birds. So, the only thing that surprised Chen Shi was that, this old man did not even have a body, but he still had to rely on the soul crystal to survive. How many years had he lived? 500 years? Or 1,000 years? In any case, he had lived longer than Chen Shi. Chapter 358. Looking at the soul crystal in front of him, Chen Shi could not help but put himself in the old man's shoes. If it had been him, he should not be living in this way. It was obvious that the old man could no longer be reborn, so he could only put his Yuanying in the soul crystal, and then rely on the soul crystal to barely maintain the state of his divine soul. Just like the remnant soul of the azure dragon in the Sundial Brilliance Temple. But what was the point of this? Without a body, the soul crystal was just a cage in disguise. If one could live for 10 or 20 more years, they might feel that they had profited, but if they really stayed in it for hundreds or even thousands of years. It was a little scary just thinking about it. One had to know that although the divine soul could perceive the outside world in the soul crystal, the feeling was completely different from that of ordinary people. It was probably somewhat similar to a sixth sense. For the old man, it was like being in a world of chaos that had not yet been opened. He could not directly see the outside world, but he could clearly perceive any subtle movements in the outside world. Struggling at death's door in the gap between two worlds, the loneliness brought about by drifting away from reality was actually a kind of torture and punishment that ordinary people could not bear at all. Therefore, Chen Shi could not help but sigh from the bottom of his heart. This old man was also a ruthless person. Chen Shi silently looked at the portrait on the wall. After a long while, he took the lead to break the silence. Well, I don't have as much time as you, so don't waste time here. Looking at your age, you should know a lot of things. Let's talk. I'm very interested in the matters of ancient cultivators. Why don't we start talking about it? Chen Shi opened the conversation. But the old man did not immediately answer after hearing it, but instead laughed. Although his expression could not be seen, the laughter gave Chen Shi a strange feeling. That feeling. It was somewhat like the young man and wise old man who often appeared in jokes. The young man asked the old man to answer his questions, but the old man smiled and did not say anything, but instead put on a posture of having seen through the world of mortals and understood the true meaning of life. In this regard, Chen Shi's reaction was completely different from that of the young man in the joke. Keeping me in suspense, right? Alright, take your time. I'm going to kill that guy. As soon as he finished speaking, Chen Shi stood up and pretended to leave. His unconventional behavior immediately threw the old man into disarray. He had no choice but to shout anxiously. Sir, please wait. It's not that this old man is deliberately keeping you in suspense, but it's a long story. Mister, please take a seat and listen to this old man from the beginning. Hearing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but snort coldly. He used his hand to tidy up his clothes, and then slowly sat back down. Could it be that Jianghu dared to challenge the patriarch in public? Most likely, this old man was backing him up. It seemed like the Jiang clan really had no successors. Otherwise, how could a mere above-heaven tier receive such importance? Chen Shi sat in the chair with a cold face. The old man originally wanted to take the opportunity to inquire about Chen Shi's background, but he didn't expect Chen Shi's style to be so simple and crude, threatening Jiang life at every turn. The hope of the Jiang clan's revival was all placed on Jiang. Since Chen Shi had already displayed such an attitude, the old man naturally didn't dare to change the topic. He could only open his mouth and tell the story. Actually, this matter starts from ancient times. The so-called ancient times actually referred to the time before the Xia dynasty, which was the time before the birth of human civilization. Western scholars did not recognize the existence of the Xia dynasty. On one hand, it was because Westerners had a different understanding of Wuxia culture. On the other hand, it was because archaeologists had not found any written records of the Xia dynasty. If it weren't for the discovery of the Yin ruins in Yuzhou, Western scholars would even doubt the authenticity of the Shang dynasty. Both the Xia dynasty and the ancient Indian civilization appeared more than 4,000 years ago, while the ancient Egyptian civilization and the Sumerian civilization appeared more than 7,000 years ago. However, it had only been 2,000 years since the day Jesus was born, but human civilization had already stepped into the information age from the Iron Age, the Steam Age, and the Electric Age. It wouldn't be long before human beings could truly enter the space age and soar freely in the universe. How many years had it been? And what about Earth? Earth was already 4.6 billion years old. 46000000000. A series of zeros, wasn't that enough to explain the problem? Therefore, there was no doubt that as early as the ancient times, there were humans on Earth, but they were forced to leave. This was the fundamental reason why humans could still find records of mythical civilizations from ancient books to this day. Earth was a cultivation planet, not a dead planet like Mars. It was the source of life and the beginning of everything. In front of it, immortal cultivators were too insignificant. Tides rose and fell. When the spirit energy of Earth declined, it was like the water of the Pacific Ocean drying up for immortal cultivators. Doomsday came. Fortunately, there was always a way out. Coincidentally, the Taiqing divine ancestor appeared out of nowhere and saved everyone from the fire and water with his own strength. Although Chen Shi already knew this information from Bai Hong, he didn't interrupt the old man. Instead, he silently listened to the old man again. However, as he listened, Chen Shi suddenly realized, there was a big difference between the old man and Bai Hong's narration. At first, Chen Shi suspected that either of them was lying, but on second thought, he immediately dismissed this speculation. After all, it had been 10,000 years since the ancient times. 3 people's words could become a tiger, let alone these legends passed down by word of mouth. Therefore, Chen Shi didn't think that either of them was lying to him. One lived on Earth, and the other lived in the great world. The two of them were in different positions, so what they saw and heard was naturally different. Bai Hong focused on the great world, but when it came to the old man, he naturally focused on Earth after the ancient immortal cultivators left. So, the Taiqing divine ancestor didn't leave with everyone back then, but left some people behind. They either had old grudges with the Taiqing divine ancestor or committed some unforgivable sin. In short, they were abandoned by the Taiqing divine ancestor, so they were forced to stay on Earth. However, the Taiqing divine ancestor was deeply righteous. How could he not understand that the sins of the elders had nothing to do with the juniors? Therefore, the divine ancestor made a promise: as long as the descendants of the sinners could cultivate to the diviner level, they could return to Tiandu through the divine gate. This was the origin of the concept of ascension. In fact, in the beginning, the cultivation environment on Earth wasn't as bad as it was today. Therefore, there were dozens of diviner-level cultivators back then, which led to the legend of the investiture of the gods. Wasn't it a good thing for everyone to form a group and ascend? Unfortunately, no one would have thought that the cultivation environment on Earth would deteriorate so quickly. Starting from the Warring States period, the spiritual energy of heaven and earth began to decrease rapidly, so much so that the divine gate rarely appeared in 100 years. The living environment of immortal cultivators became worse and worse. In the end, they had to hide among the famous mountains and rivers, relying on the weak spiritual energy in the blessed lands to barely maintain their legacies. Thus, the 5 great legacies were born. The immortal cultivators were declining day by day, and there was also the matter of the first emperor burning books and burying scholars. Everything about the ancient immortal cultivators could only regretfully come to an end. Not bad, a very good story. After listening to the old man's detailed narration, Chen Shi couldn't help but praise it again and again. It really gave birth to a feeling of looking through history, magnificent and magnificent. It could be said to be soul-stirring. However, although the story was good, Chen Shi didn't forget the purpose of this trip. Chapter 359. Just as the old man had promised, as long as Chen Shi was willing to spare Jiang Xingxing's life, he would tell Chen Shi everything he knew. Reality proved that the old man had no intention of deceiving Chen Shi. Perhaps it was out of fear, or perhaps it was because he wanted to form a good relationship with Chen Shi, but the old man told him everything he knew without hesitation. However, what Chen Shi did not expect was, when he mentioned the name, Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu, the old man suddenly fell silent. Chen Shi waited for a while. When he showed an obvious hint of impatience, the old man's voice slowly sounded from the soul crystal. Arbiter of Fate Xian Nu? It has been more than 3,000 years since the Jiang clan stepped foot on Daoist Island. You are not the first person to ask this question in these 3,000 years, and I believe you will not be the last. The reason why the Jiang clan's Xian Nu has a longer lifespan than the Xian Nu of the outside world is because there is no real arbiter of fate Xian Nu in the Jiang clan. Chen Shi could not help but frown slightly when he heard that. There was no Xian Nu? Then what about the woman who stood beside Jiang Yuankue and gave orders? Although Chen Shi did not say anything, the old man seemed to have sensed his thoughts and immediately added, Yuan Qing is indeed the current arbiter of fate Xian Nu of the Jiang clan. She is responsible for presiding over the clan's sacrificial ceremonies, praying for blessings, and other matters. However, compared to your wife, her Xian Nu is just a fake. As soon as he said this, Chen Shi instantly understood what the old man meant. He had long known that the condition to become a Xian Nu was to give up the earthly soul. He had originally thought that the Jiang clan had some secret method to extend the Xian Nu's lifespan, but in the end, he realized that the so-called secret method was to prevent the Xiannu from giving up the earthly soul. Wasn't the old man talking nonsense with him and wasting his time? The old man's answer made Qianxi quite dissatisfied, but this was obviously not the time to flare up, so he could only frown and ask, "I don't have time to talk nonsense with you, you have to answer me honestly. Xiannu is a fait accompli. Is there any way to cure her?" At this point, Qianxi couldn't help but promise the old man, "You should know how important this matter is to me. If you help me today, I promise, even if I have to go through water and tread on fire in the future, I will definitely return this favor to you. I won't go back on my word." Qianxi, who never made promises easily, took the initiative to make a promise to the old man at this moment. It was easy to imagine how anxious he was. Although Qin Ruoying only had a slight headache, Qianxi felt as if he was facing a formidable enemy. In fact, in the end, he was just afraid. Afraid of losing. After all, he had already separated from Ying once. The husband and wife had gone through different kinds of suffering and torment to finally get to where they were today. The family of three had finally reunited and lived a happy life together. If Qin Ruoying was safe and sound, then it would be fine. But if something happened to her, Qianxi would never forgive himself. Absolutely not. Of course, these emotions were buried in the deepest part of his heart. Naturally, Qianxi couldn't easily reveal them. Therefore, after making his promise, he silently waited for the old man's answer. The room was very quiet. It was so quiet that he could even hear the wind outside. The white curtain was gently blown by the wind, just like his heart that couldn't calm down. After an unknown amount of time, the old man's voice rang out again. However, the old man didn't rush to answer Qianxi's question. Instead, he changed the topic and asked coldly, "I can answer your question, but before that, please answer this old man's 3 questions, okay?" Although he didn't know what the old man was up to, now was not the time to be anxious, so Qianxi could only answer patiently, "Please go ahead." The first question, "Sir, do you know what realm the divine ancestor was at back then?" Hearing the old man's question, Qianxi couldn't help but be stunned. Although he wasn't interested in these unimportant things, since the old man mentioned it, there must be a reason, so he seriously thought about it. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, insightful void, Dao integration, tribulation ascension, Mahayana. Since the divine ancestor was able to find a great world in the void, his cultivation must be at least above the insightful void realm or even the legendary Dao integration realm. Such a powerful person was definitely a big shot in the heavenly jade world, comparable to the sect master of the divine sect. Thinking of this, even Qianxi couldn't help but yearn for it. Earth used to be, perhaps it was more prosperous than he had imagined. While Qianxi was pondering, the old man didn't give him time to think at all, and directly continued to ask, the second question, 10,000 years ago, how many cultivators were there in the divine continent? This question really tested Qianxi. He wasn't an archaeologist, how would he know how many people there were at that time? But then, the old man threw out a third question. The third question, "Sir, how do you think the divine ancestor could bring all these people to the great world with his strength alone?" At this point, if Qianxi still didn't understand what the old man meant, it could only mean that he was too stupid. Therefore, the moment the old man finished asking the third question, Qianxi suddenly stood up from his chair as if he had been electrocuted, and then couldn't help but exclaim, "The arbiter of fate Xiannu? Yes, yes. Sir, you should also know that the arbiter of fate is the mandate of heaven, but how can we cultivators believe in the groundless heaven? The so-called heaven's will, it's the divine ancestor's order to bear the fate of all living beings, bear the fate of all living beings?" When he heard this, Qianxi's expression changed drastically. He could already guess what the old man wanted to say. Although the Taiqing divine ancestor was omnipotent, he couldn't bring millions of ancient cultivators to the great world with his strength alone. Therefore, there had to be some secret behind this. And the key to this secret was clearly the arbiter of fate Xianxia. As expected, the old man quickly confirmed Chen Shi's guess. The arbiter of fate Xianxia, that's a nice title, but to put it bluntly, they're the living sacrifices chosen by the divine ancestor. Everyone says that the divine ancestor has the merit of saving the world, and with his omnipotent power, he turned the tide and saved the world, but they've forgotten the road to the great world. Chapter 360. A Living Sacrifice. The moment he heard these 3 words, Chen Shi understood everything. Even if the grand pure divine ancestor's cultivation was extremely high, it was impossible for him to forcefully open and stabilize the passage between the 2 worlds by himself. After all, there were too many people who needed him to save. Not 1,000, not 10,000, but millions and tens of millions. The grand pure divine ancestor did indeed save the world. But at the same time, this contribution was also stained with the blood of too many innocent people. Not everyone could travel through the void and cross realms as they wished. Therefore, the grand pure divine ancestor could only rely on external forces to allow everyone to go to the great world unharmed. If the sundial brilliance temple was the coordinate between the 2 worlds, then the soul of Xianxia was the track to the great world. When the end of the world was approaching, the train led by the grand pure divine ancestor carried the hopes of the ancient cultivators and rumbled toward the great world full of the unknown. The only place that was not harmonious was probably the railroad track. There were millions of people who needed to be saved. The number of Xianxia who needed to be sacrificed was also not a small number. One after another, weak and fragile souls. In terms of individual strength, they were not even worth mentioning. They were too weak. A single strand of silk could not make a thread, and a single tree could not make a forest. Under the guidance of the grand pure divine ancestor, these weak souls of Xianxia were connected to each other one by one. Like sections of track, they paved all the way from Earth to the great world, forcibly opening up a path of survival for the cultivators in the Age of Doom. How was this a path of survival? It was a nether river full of wronged souls. Because, only through the guidance of Xianxia's soul could the grand pure divine ancestor use this to stabilize the passage between the 2 worlds, so that those who were not at the soul formation stage could safely pass through the void cracks. Although he had not witnessed this history with his own eyes, Chen Shi had a rough understanding of that ancient era. He was even willing to believe this was not a dark past, but a grand epic. In order to continue the legacy of the ancient cultivators, even the weak Xianxia was willing to sacrifice her life to protect the legacy of the ancient cultivators. Traveling in the wind and rain, passing on the torch. Despite all the hardships, the jade was finally formed. In truth, the sacred ancestor wasn't wrong. With the divine ancestor's cultivation, there was no need for him to care about the lives and deaths of all living beings. Wouldn't it be great for him to live a carefree life in the great world by himself? But he didn't. Instead, he chose to return to Earth and seek a chance of survival for all living beings with his own strength. It was a pity. History had already proven that the founder of every dynasty was great, but after that, each generation would be worse than the last. The world only remembered the peerless leader, but forgot about the Siming Xianxia who had sacrificed everything to save them. This was also the reason why Bai Hong knew nothing about Siming Xianxia. No matter what the reason was, the survivors of the great world had long forgotten the greatness of Siming Xianxia. Back then, the divine ancestor gathered the most precious treasures in the world and refined a total of 13 soul-amassing cauldrons. There is one in each of the 5 places of inheritance, and the other 8 are scattered in the divine land. Now, no one knows where they are. These 13 soul-amassing cauldrons and the heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror formed the set of supreme treasures that could save all living beings. Of course, the soul-amassing cauldron was mainly used to collect Xianxia's earthly soul. The heaven-bearing efficate floating dawn mirror was the true core. After Xianxia offered her earthly soul to the soul-amassing cauldron, the divine ancestor held the mirror in his hand and led everyone to the blissful great world in the void. The old man recounted the events of the past. After hearing this, Xianxia frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Seeing that he didn't intend to speak, the old man paused for a moment before continuing. I'm sure you know that with your wife's current cultivation, she definitely wouldn't have fallen sick if her soul was fine, so I'm guessing, this might have something to do with the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror. After all, this treasure was left behind by the divine ancestor. No one knows what secrets are hidden in it. If you want to completely solve this problem, I'm afraid you have to find the heaven-bearing effecate floating dawn mirror first. After the old man finished speaking, the room fell silent again. After a long time, Xianxia seemed to be talking to himself, and couldn't help but mutter, "Sky-bearing imitation fooly mirror, right?" Seeing that his reaction was a little strange, the old man comforted him. For thousands of years, I've seen many similar situations. Many Xiannu wanted to cultivate when they grew up, but because they lacked one of their 3 earthly souls, they could only die with regret, but once they found their earthly soul, they could walk, sit, and lie down. Their spiritual sense was no different from that of ordinary people. Your wife only had a little dizziness and dark vision. It shouldn't be a big deal, so you don't have to worry too much. Not a big deal? Xianxia wasn't as optimistic about this as the old man. But now wasn't the time to be worrying unnecessarily, so he could only put this problem aside for the time being. He then stood up and said, "All right, since I've said what I needed to say, let's leave it at that for today. I'll remember this favor. In the future, if the Jianghu family has anything to ask of me, I won't hesitate to help." Then I'll thank Mr. Chen first. The conversation finally came to an end. Jianghu had been waiting at the bridge for a long time. When he saw Xianxia walk out of the room, he immediately went to the pavilion in the middle of the lake. After sneaking a peek at the situation in the room, he finally felt relieved. It seemed like he was really afraid that Xianxia would hurt the elder ancestor. "Alright, you don't have to follow me. Go inside and wait." When Xianxia saw that Jianghu wanted to send him off, he waved his hand and rejected him. Then, he walked back the way he came from. When he returned to the shore, the little fellow was still playing with the red-crowned cranes in the pond. These red-crowned cranes were like dolphins. They would rub against her from time to time, which really made the little fellow very happy. If it weren't for Qin Ruoying's repeated dissuasion, the little fellow even wanted to bring a few of them back. The little fellow was very happy, but Xianxia's mood didn't seem to be very good. The little fellow had long been trained to observe people's expressions. When she saw that Xianxia was unhappy, she didn't dawdle anymore. After waving goodbye to the red-crowned cranes, she lay in Xianxia's arms and obediently got on the boat. Under the gaze of the Jianghu family, the yacht slowly sailed away from the dock. At this time, Qin Ruoying gently held Xianxia's hand and asked softly, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Xianxia pinched the little fellow's butt and signaled her to sit still. After that, he held Qin Ruoying's hand and went to the bow of the boat. It was late at night. A bright moon hung high above the sea, constantly emitting a cold light. Looking at his lover beside him, Xianxia couldn't help but ask faintly, "Ying, what kind of person do you think I am?" "Why would you ask that?" "I'm actually a very selfish person." "I don't think so." Qin Ruoying felt that something was wrong with Xianxia. She imitated the little fellow and put her head on his other shoulder, hoping to make him feel at ease. However, Xianxia looked as if he was sick. He stared blankly at the bright moon and replied in a daze, "Really, I'm very selfish. For you, I can give up the whole world. All living beings are just ants in my eyes. If one day you're no longer here, I think, I might be able to destroy this world and make all the unpleasant things disappear." Xianxia was still expressing his feelings when Qin Ruoying suddenly pinched him and said with an unhappy face, "What nonsense are you talking about?" The little fellow didn't understand what they were talking about, but she could clearly feel that her mother was angry, so she imitated Qin Ruoying, raised her head and said in a coquettish voice, what nonsense are you talking about? Well, the eldest and the second in the family were furious. Xianxia had to immediately raise his hands to surrender and apologize. Okay, I'm talking nonsense. Ying, don't be angry, and you, why are you making a fuss? I'm not making a fuss. Hearing this, the little fellow immediately pouted and retorted with dissatisfaction, it's Papa's disobedience that made Mama angry. I'm so obedient, Mama won't be angry with me. Okay, you're the most obedient. Come, let Daddy kiss you. No. I'm angry. After saying that, the little fellow immediately turned her head to the side and refused to let Xianxia kiss her no matter what. One wanted to kiss, the other wanted to block. Looking at the noisy father and daughter, Qin Ruoying couldn't help but smile, and then she leaned her head on Xianxia's shoulder again. In fact, she knew what Xianxia was worried about. But for her, instead of deliberately preparing for a rainy day, it was better to live in the moment calmly. People often have thousands of thoughts about the future, but they forget to calm down and appreciate the present moment. The future days. Chapter 361. The next morning. Under the caress of the morning sun, the yacht slowly sailed into the Zhonghai harbor. Although they were in Zhonghai, the couple had no intention of disturbing Lin Xian. The family of three was like a group of tourists passing by in a hurry. They didn't even stay for long. After accompanying the little one for a meal of KFC at the airport, they got on the plane back home. The only gain from this trip to Zhonghai was, perhaps it was success that put Xianxia in a bad mood. They really came in high spirits, but returned in disappointment. Obviously, the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror had already gone to the great world with the Tai Ching sage. If he wanted to completely cure Qin Ruoying's dizziness, then he had to go to the great world himself. In this regard, Xianxia only had 3 words in his mind, F***CKU. He had just returned from the heavenly spiral world after a narrow escape, but now he had to go to a great world like heavenly spiral. Wasn't he just too bored? Regarding this unknown world, Xianxia had long made up her mind to keep a respectful distance from it. But fortunately, ever since he destroyed the 5 holy palaces, no matter how turbulent the spirit energy tide was, the divine gate didn't appear again. This also indirectly proved that, the great world had lost contact with Earth. In fact, whether it was immortal cultivation techniques or modern technology, if one wanted to teleport from one place to another, the coordinates were essential. Without the coordinates, the divine gate would never open again. Unless, the Tai Ching sage came back and crossed the void to establish new coordinates for the ancient immortal cultivators. And this was also why Xianxia said he was selfish. Because he had also cut off the possibility of celestial ascension. From now on, the 2 worlds would no longer have any communication. The people above couldn't come down, and the people below couldn't go up. You were in your great world, and I was in my global village. Everyone minded their own business, wasn't that good? Since it was impossible to get the sky-bearing art and floating dawn mirror, Qin Ruoying's illness could only be temporarily put aside for observation. On the way back, Xianxia felt that something was wrong the more he thought about it. Previously, he had placed all his attention on Ming Xian Nu and neglected the old man's strange behavior. Was it really so easy to deal with an old monster that had lived for over 1,000 years? Besides, since the Jiang clan did not have the Ming Xian Nu, how did Daoist Island become one of the 5 great lands of inheritance? The old man's story should be true, but Xianxia had a feeling that the old man was deliberately hiding some important information. However, since he did not plan to go to the great world, he did not need to delve too deeply into these things. Anyway, Daoist Island was right there. Once Xianxia realized that the old monster had lied to him, he could not guarantee that he would do something terrible. After the family of 3 returned to Shangjing, their days were peaceful again. The summer sun shone brightly, and the willows by the lakeside rustled gently. Sightseeing, playing in the water, and flying kites, Hohai had different sceneries throughout the year. Time passed quietly amidst the laughter of the three little fellows. In the blink of an eye, the summer vacation was over, and the country welcomed the start of school again. And this little guy had finally ushered in the most important phase of his life. School. To be honest, Niannian's personality had begun to change under the intentional indulgence of her husband and wife. Although she was still the obedient, sensible, and polite little fellow, she would throw a tantrum from time to time now. She had some traces of a spoiled brat. Of course, Chen Shi and Qin Ruoying could not be blamed for this. After all, they owed their child too much. Niannian had been an orphan since she was young. Now that she finally had her parents, shouldn't she throw a tantrum and experience the feeling of being doted on by her parents? Childhood, happiness was the most important thing. However, a child could throw a tantrum at home, but no one would indulge her outside. Therefore, a few days before school started, Chen Shi seriously tutored the little fellow and warned her about many things. For example, she had to study hard in school, listen to the teachers, abide by the school rules, and not bully her classmates. Of course, she could not be bullied by her classmates. When Chen Shi mentioned the last point, before the little fellow had time to nod, the two brothers couldn't wait and shouted loudly, "With us here, no one dares to bully her." The younger brother, who had always been straightforward and honest, did not forget to add at this moment, "If anyone bullies you, just tell me. I'll help you beat him up. And me. Let's beat him up together. Okay." Yes, the two brothers also wanted to go to school with Niannian. Although it was only a senior class, this was the first step in the little fellow's student life. Therefore, even though Chen Shi had always said that he wanted to let Niannian live an ordinary life, when it came time to choose, he still listened to his sister-in-law's advice and chose the Donghua Gate Kindergarten, which was located next to the Forbidden City and was known as the best in the country. It was not an exaggeration. If one stood outside and casually threw a brick into the kindergarten, it might hit the grandson of some big boss. One could imagine how deep the background of this kindergarten was. It was said that the children of the rich won at the starting line. From this moment on, the competition had already begun. Donghua Gate Kindergarten was less than 5 kilometers away from Hohai. On the first day of school, there was no way to take the school bus, so Chen Shi had to personally send the three of them to school. Along the way, the three little fellows were extremely happy. They carried the same style of cartoon school bag. Niannian walked in the middle, and the two brothers stood on her left and right, like guardians, protecting her at all times. A bus slowly drove over from afar. Chen Shi did not have any reaction, but the two brothers excitedly squeezed Niannian onto the sidewalk, and then very seriously warned, "Niannian, when you walk, you have to look at the bus. Look at how big that bus is. If it hits you, you'll be dead. Do you understand?" "Oh." The little fellow nodded blankly. Then, she looked back at Chen Shi. After seeing Chen Shi smile and nod at her, she turned her head and began to look at the bus next to her. Everything was too novel. Although she had been to kindergarten before, this seemed to be the first time she went to school. Papa also said that in the future, they would have to take the school bus to and from school. School bus? What was that? Thinking about it, the little fellow could not help but raise her head and look around. On the old streets of Shangjing, the bright sunlight shone on her through the shade of the trees. The surrounding cars and pedestrians seemed to be a little different from usual. Was this going to school? Chen Shi walked with the three children for a while. After confirming the dedicated parking space for the school bus, he took a taxi directly to Donghua Gate Kindergarten. It was only 5 kilometers, so they arrived very quickly. As soon as they got out of the car, Chen Shi realized that this kindergarten was indeed a little famous. The cars parked in front of the school were not particularly expensive luxury cars, but the license plates all started with Beijing A. It should be known that most of the cars starting with Beijing A8 were leaders of the government, while Beijing AG6 was national level. However, none of the cars with Beijing A license plates were easy to deal with. Even the traffic police had to go around them. At this time, Chen Shi suddenly remembered, this was Shangjing. Next door was the Forbidden City, and next door was Zongnanhai. Would the security guard let someone like him in by taxi? Of course, this was only Chen Shi's imagination. After he showed the procedures that his sister-in-law had done for him in advance, the security guard at the door respectfully welcomed him in. How sensitive were Chen Shi's ears. Therefore, as soon as he entered the school, he found that these parents basically knew each other. Everyone even greeted each other. Since the parents knew each other, the children were naturally childhood sweethearts as well. Seeing this, Chen Shi frowned slightly. These children. Chapter 362. The children of the courtyard could also be considered a characteristic of Wuxia. In the past, the units had to allocate houses and everyone in the unit lived together. Everyone saw each other all day long and their children would naturally play together since they were young. They were the so-called childhood sweethearts. Of course, it would be fine if it was an ordinary unit. The children of the courtyard that people talked about were mostly the children of high-ranking cadres. Their parents either held important positions in various ministries or were cadres above the regimental level. These children grew up together since they were young. There was a clear distinction between who could play with whom and who could oppose whom. In addition, because they had seen a lot since they were young, the children of the courtyard were usually more mature. In this regard, Chen Shi had to hesitate. If he put Nian among these children, for her growth, was it good or bad? However, after thinking about it, Chen Shi still felt relieved. After all, these children had received different education since they were young and there were more restrictions in various aspects. If he really wanted to compare, it might be easier to get along with them than children from ordinary families. In short, he would give it a try first. If Nian was unhappy, he would find another place for her. While thinking, Chen Shi led the three children into the school. Today was the registration day. The main purpose was to help the children adapt to the environment of the kindergarten. It was not official enrollment yet. Therefore, after Chen Shi filled in the form, he led the three children to the classroom under the guidance of the teacher. Since the school was so famous, there must be some skills in the background. Chen Shi glanced casually and found that there seemed to be more teachers in the school than there were parents. There were main class teachers, assistant class teachers, auxiliary class teachers, life teachers, care and health teachers, there was everything. Along the way, regardless of whether they knew each other, the teachers were very kind and greeted the three children. Those who did not know would think that they were eating heideleo. Under the guidance of the teacher, they quickly arrived at the big classroom. The three children did not go to the middle class but came directly to the big class. Such unfamiliar faces naturally attracted the attention of the other parents. Other families usually had one person dragging one person, but Chen Shi was dragging three people. In addition, he was a new face, so everyone couldn't help but whisper to each other. "Old Li, have you seen this person before? It looks like a new face. He didn't even come to the parent-teacher meeting yesterday. Didn't you see the enrollment list before? Which unit is he from?" "Ah, now that you mention it, I remember that there were originally only 60 spots for this semester." However, a few days before the start of the semester, 3 spots were forcefully inserted. They didn't even attend the interview and just waited to report. "You didn't even attend the interview? So powerful? Isn't that so? When I brought the child here, I didn't even pass the interview. If it weren't for my uncle, I reckon it would have been over. We begged, and it wasn't easy for us to get a spot. Yet, he casually dragged in 3 people. This is, Shu, you know." After a brief discussion, the 2 parents glanced at each other in tacit understanding. They immediately came up with a plan. There were many small tables in the classroom. 3 to 5 parents gathered around a table with their children. However, similar discussions were constantly taking place at each table. Why do parents nowadays like to let their children go to good schools? Grades were only one of the reasons. The most important thing was, a good school could build better connections for the children, and the importance of these connections could not be compared with a few simple numbers on the report card. Classmate relationships. Only 10 or 20 years later, when everyone had stepped into society, would they deeply realize how valuable this word was. Although everyone was whispering, Xianxia pretended not to hear them. As soon as he entered the classroom, he took the 3 children and sat down according to their nameplates. The children in the kindergarten were still young. Naturally, it was impossible for the children to go on stage and introduce themselves as soon as they entered the classroom. Therefore, they could only wait for the children to adapt before the teachers arranged for them to begin the self-introduction. There were many delicate little toys on the table. As soon as they sat down, the 3 children were attracted by these toys. The teachers were indeed very attentive. They even prepared an exclusive gift bag for each child. The little girl was still very familiar with her name. Therefore, she immediately grabbed the gift box with the words, Chen Nian, written on it and couldn't wait to open it. Inside was a children's picture book that could be used in both Chinese and English. At the same time, there were many exquisite puzzle toys. Therefore, the 3 children immediately gathered together to play like they did in the tea house. There were already 2 children sitting at this table. Seeing that they were so lively, the 2 children went over to play with them. Perhaps because she had stayed in the tea house for a long time, Nian Nian usually played with unfamiliar children. Therefore, she did not hesitate. With a wave of her small hand, she very generously invited the 2 children. It was fun with more people. Since the children were playing together, the adults naturally took the opportunity to strike up a conversation. Bro, are you a dragon phoenix triplet? The one who spoke was a bespectacled man about the same age as Xianxia. Although the bespectacled man wore casual clothes and spoke casually, he exuded a strong aura. However, he exuded a strong sense of self-confidence, and this kind of self-confidence did not make people feel disgusted. It was as if he was supposed to be like this. After hearing the bespectacled man's words, Xianxia responded with a smile, no, they are the children of friends. The 2 families are close to each other. They help each other out when they have time. Oh, so that's the case. The bespectacled man did not seem to expect that there would be parents who did not bring their children to the registration day, so he was stunned on the spot. At this time, the middle-aged man next to him who had not spoken suddenly reached out his hand to Xianxia and said, "Hello, my name is Wang Junsheng. This is our child, honey." Seeing this, Xianxia had to politely shake hands with him and then respond, "Hello, my name is Xianxia." Xianxia? Wang Junsheng murmured the name but found that he had no impression of this name at all, so he turned to look at the bespectacled man. Seeing this, the bespectacled man seemed to have received some instructions. The smile on his face suddenly became a lot more enthusiastic. Almost instantly, he reached out his right hand to Xianxia. "Hello, Brother Chen, my name is Zhao Ziyu." Speaking of this, Zhao Ziyu deliberately paused, and then seemed to casually add, "I live in the planning commission courtyard like Brother Wang, so the children of our 2 families are very familiar with each other since young. Generally, we don't play with other children. I didn't expect to get together with your child so quickly today. It seems that they really hit it off. He's just a kid. He can play with anyone." The bespectacled man's words had a deeper meaning, but Xianxia did not seem to understand. After responding lightly, he did not speak anymore. One must know that the courtyard was also divided into different grades. The Planning Commission courtyard was the highest grade courtyard in the entire Wuxia. It was not because of external factors such as geography, environment, living conditions, etc., but because a total of more than 200 top bosses walked out of this courtyard. Any one of them was enough to make Wuxia tremble. The reason why the bespectacled man deliberately revealed to Xianxia was that he really could not understand Xianxia's background, so he wanted to show his cards. If Xianxia's identity was at this level, then everyone could talk happily. If he couldn't reach it, there are so many seats, please change to another one. In fact, the courtyard was a circle. Chapter 363. After the bespectacled man explained everything to Xianxia, he couldn't help but put on a haughty look. He was confident, but he didn't know that this confidence was meaningless in front of Xianxia. Therefore, after Xianxia chuckled a few times, he acted as if he didn't understand the bespectacled man's words and turned to talk to Wang Junsheng about the child. In this spacious and warm classroom, he wasn't a god, nor was he Mr. Chen. He was just a child's father. Seeing that Xianxia didn't play by the rules, Wang Junsheng couldn't figure him out for a while. However, he didn't neglect Xianxia because of this. Since he didn't want to talk, then he couldn't blame him for investigating on his own. Therefore, after giving the bespectacled man a look, Wang Junsheng followed the topic and started chatting with Xianxia. If you ignored the content of their conversation, the atmosphere was similar to a business gathering. Just a few glasses of wine and there would be a harmonious atmosphere of drinking and chatting. Perhaps it was because they were accompanied by their parents, the children quickly adapted to the classroom environment, and then they began to play freely. A few of them were lively and started to clamor about going outside to play on the slide. Seeing that the atmosphere was lively enough, the teacher came to the center of the classroom and kindly asked the children to stand up one by one. Then, she guided them to start introducing themselves. It was the little girl's first time facing such a situation, so she was naturally a little embarrassed when it was her turn. Under Xianxia's constant encouragement, the little girl finally mustered up the courage to stand up and say timidly, My name is Chen Nian. I'm 5 years old this year. It was just a few simple words, but she stuttered as if she was stuttering. After saying that, the little girl immediately shut her mouth and stood there timidly, not knowing what to do. Very good. From today onwards, Chen Nian is a member of our big family. Come, let's welcome her together. Welcome the new student. After saying that, the teacher took the lead and applauded. When the children saw this, they followed the teacher's example and clapped while shouting, Welcome the new student. Speaking of which, this was the first time in Nian Nian's life that she had officially integrated into a group. That strange feeling immediately made her feel a little overwhelmed, so she could only lower her head and constantly tug at the corner of her clothes with her hands. That shy and bashful look on her face was extremely adorable. After Xianxia pulled her back to her seat, the little thing slowly opened her eyes again. Then she carefully listened to each student's self-introduction, and under the guidance of the teacher, she kept applauding. It looked like she was trying to integrate herself into this new group. The little girl was already so nervous, not to mention the brothers. Of course. When it was Wenwen's self-introduction, he actually said, My name is Xia Ming. When he heard this, he corrected him, Xia, don't believe him. He's Xiaoan. Xia Ming. You. My Xia. The older brother instinctively retorted. Then, as if he suddenly came back to his senses, he couldn't help but mumble weakly, No. I'm Xia Wan, he's Xia Ming. The twins were extremely eye-catching wherever they went. When the two brothers made such a scene, all the parents present were immediately amused and laughed. The other children looked at them in confusion, they really didn't understand what was going on. How could two people in this world look exactly the same? Everyone looked at the brothers curiously. The differences in the brothers' personalities were completely on display here. The older brother, who had always been shrewd and never let himself be taken advantage of, was now blushing like a monkey's butt. The younger brother, who had always been simple and honest, was not at all timid in the face of everyone's stares. Instead, he was complaining that his older brother was using his identity. The two brothers were like two pistachios, immediately making everyone laugh out loud. Just like that, Xianxia led the three children into the capital city's second-generation circle. And the curtains slowly began on the three children's school days. After all, kindergarten life was quite relaxing. Perhaps because of the brothers' company, the little girl didn't cry from beginning to end. Sometimes, she even took the initiative to say that she wanted to go to kindergarten. Xianxia said that the little girl would take the school bus by herself, but when it was time to go to school, he still personally picked her up and sent her to school every day. At the same time, he also instructed Big Cat to wait outside the kindergarten gate at all times. From this, it could be seen that he really cared for Nian to the extreme. When life was on the right track, time seemed to pass much faster. In the blink of an eye, it was National Day again. It was cold in the north, and at this time, people all wrapped up their jackets. There was no military parade this year, so naturally, there were fewer tourists in Shangjing than in previous years. It was still the large courtyard, but compared to the desolation of previous years, the Qin family's courtyard was particularly lively this year. Early in the morning, Gu Lao took the brothers to the courtyard. Xiao Yuan was busy moving out all the tables and chairs in the house, while her sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan sat in the main hall to discuss their own understanding. Even Qin Ruoying, who hadn't shown up for a long time, today, she finally got Xianxi's permission to make an exception and take a day off. In fact, since the family of three returned from Daoist Island, Qin Ruoying became the one who worked the hardest. She was cultivating in seclusion almost all the time. Her sister-in-law's dizziness wasn't very obvious because she had already stepped into the celestial being realm. Therefore, Xianxia came to a conclusion: this symptom might be effectively suppressed with the improvement of her cultivation base. In this case, he naturally had to urge Qin Ruoying to cultivate diligently at all times. After all, he had already destroyed the Sundial Brilliance Temple. Without the blessing of 8 times the time difference, Qin Ruoying could only rely on her own efforts. Unfortunately, her talent wasn't good, so she could only work harder than ordinary people. And this was the fundamental reason why Qin Ruoying had been living in seclusion recently. Today's weather was good. The chill of early autumn was swept away by the warm sunshine. The autumn air was refreshing, and the clouds were light and the wind was light. Everything was so tranquil, just like Xianxi's mood at the moment. The couple stood side by side on the steps of the west wing. Looking at the three lively and cute little guys, the corners of their mouths couldn't help but reveal a faint smile. However, life was like a train. After arriving at this station, there was still the next station. Xianxia wasn't even ready to welcome the next station when the train suddenly stopped here. In just a moment, the figures of his sister-in-law and Qin Yongyan suddenly appeared on the steps outside the main hall, and Xianxia immediately held Qin Ruoying's hand. In addition to the three children who were still fooling around, even Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan noticed the strangeness and couldn't help but immediately look up at the sky. They saw that, the sky that was still bright and beautiful just a moment ago had been shrouded by large dark clouds in the blink of an eye. It was clearly 10:00 in the morning, but the sky was gloomy as if night had fallen. The speed of change was simply puzzling. Why did the weather suddenly change? Gu Lao looked at the sky in surprise and immediately stood up. Then he quickly said to Xiao Yuan, "It looks like it's going to rain. Quick, let's put away the tables and chairs." However, as soon as Gu Lao's voice fell, bean-sized raindrops suddenly fell from the sky. Like a summer shower, the dense raindrops continued to fall from the sky. Almost instantly, Gu Lao and Xiao Yuan became drowned rats. And at this moment, Xianxia, who was standing on the steps, suddenly reached his hand into the rain and then opened his palm, allowing the raindrops to constantly hit his palm. Feeling the surging spiritual energy contained in the rain, Xianxi's brows almost instantly twisted into the shape of the Chinese character, Sichuan. What kind of shower was this? This was simply an unprecedented tide of spiritual energy. Spiritual energy liquefied, benefiting the common people. This was Chapter 364. Rain moistens all things and nourishes the common people. In this bleak and cold late autumn, a sudden downpour instantly extinguished everyone's rising spirits because of the National Day holiday. Heavy rain was always accompanied by strong winds, and this was the north. When the heavy rain came down, it immediately drenched people from top to bottom. On the streets of the capital, people hid under the eaves and shivered. Everyone was hoping that the rain would stop, but they didn't know that. This rain, it was actually a blessing bestowed by God to all things. From the moment the rain started to fall, the big cat was like a clockwork doll that had been activated, running wildly in the rain. Big Head, who had always been trapped in the fish tank and couldn't go anywhere, jumped out of the fish tank like a fish leaping through the dragon gate. Then, through his own hard struggle, he finally jumped into the heavy rain. For most children, being in the rain was always a very fun thing to do, and the three little guys were no exception. At first, the brothers were a little restrained because Gu Lao was present. However, Nian looked back at Xianxia and found that her parents' attention was on the sky. She rushed into the heavy rain and then jumped around the yard with the big cat. She stepped on the water in the yard like a Peppa Pig who liked to step on mud. Her little face was full of excited smiles. The rain drenched her hair, and the line of water almost blurred her eyes, but this made her even happier. Under the constant urging of the little guy, the brothers finally couldn't resist the temptation. The two glanced at Gu Lao, who had just rushed up the steps to hide from the rain, and then jumped into the heavy rain like a wisp of smoke. In the heavy rain in the yard, the three little guys laughed happily. At this time, Gu Lao suddenly came back to his senses. But when he was about to scold the brothers, Xianxia's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. "Let them play for a while. A little rain won't be a problem. There's heating at home. If it's cold, they'll know to come back." Seeing how happy the three children were, coupled with Xianxia's persuasion, Gu Lao's lips moved a few times, but in the end, he didn't interrupt them. The heavy rain poured down, washing away the hustle and bustle of the entire city. It was as if the only sound left in the world was the sound of the rain. It was a feast and a carnival. Under Xianxia's signal, Qin Ruoying also walked into the heavy rain step by step. Shangjing rarely rained, so there was a lot of dust and impurities accumulated in the clouds. When it landed on one's body, there was a sticky feeling. But today's rain was different. Although it was a little cold, the rainwater was exceptionally clear and pure, giving people a comfortable feeling all over their bodies. Spiritual energy turned into rain. Even for Xianxia, this was the first time he had seen such a situation. For a moment, he couldn't help but walk into the rain and began to wantonly plunder the spiritual energy. Rain after a long drought is truly a blessing in life. However, just when everyone was celebrating because of the rain, Qin Ruoying suddenly felt her legs go soft and she staggered. If Xianxia hadn't caught her in time, she would have fallen into the puddles on the ground. "Ying. What's wrong?" "My head is a little dizzy." Qin Ruoying covered her forehead. Her originally rosy face was stained with a layer of white frost, looking as if she was sick. At this time, Qin Shueching also seemed to feel something, and couldn't help but blurt out to Xianxia, "It's here again, that feeling." After saying that, even she covered her forehead with a look of discomfort. Qin Shueching was already a celestial, but even she was so uncomfortable, one could imagine what kind of experience Qin Ruoying was experiencing at this moment. Xianxia nervously supported Qin Ruoying, and at the same time constantly poured his true essence into her, trying to ease her symptoms. Why? Why did she feel dizzy? Xianxia seriously considered all the possibilities. Suddenly, a thought flashed through Xianxia's mind. It wasn't the first time Qin Ruoying felt dizzy. Whenever this happened, it must be when the tide of spiritual energy was surging. Was it because of the tide of spiritual energy? It obviously wasn't. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was always the most important thing to cultivators, so how could it cause discomfort? Since natural factors were ruled out, only man-made factors were left. In addition to the information he had obtained on Daoist Island, Xianxia could almost conclude that this definitely had something to do with the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror. If he guessed correctly, such a huge tide of spiritual energy had appeared on Earth, so the people behind the Divine Gate wanted to use it to open the Divine Gate. But because he had already destroyed the 5 holy temples, the Divine Gate hadn't been opened. The Divine Gate, the holy temples, the tide of spiritual energy, Si Ming Xian Nu, the sky-bearing technique and the floating dawn mirror, everything was actually closely related. Just as Xianxia was pondering the root of the problem, Qin Ruoying seemed to have suddenly seen something. She looked up at the sky and muttered, I see it, there are people in the sky, they want to come down." As soon as she finished speaking, her body went limp and she completely fainted. Ying. The sudden change really shocked Xianxia. He almost instantly carried Qin Ruoying back to the west wing. Looking at the unconscious Qin Ruoying lying on the bed, Xianxia's mood fell to the bottom. At this moment, Qin Xueqing also rushed into the west wing. Then, she said to Xianxia with a pained expression, "I saw someone holding a mirror," and then he kept talking to the mirror. I could hear his voice, but I couldn't hear what he was saying at all. Qin Xueqing's expression was very pained. She looked like she was drunk, and she was trembling as she walked. "Mirror?" Xianxia repeated this word. When he was about to ask, Qin Xueqing shook her head and muttered, "I can't, my head is so dizzy. Let me sleep for a while." After saying that, she fell on the bed and lay side by side with Qin Ruoying. Looking at the two sisters who had fainted on the bed, Xianxia was silent. He carefully checked the physical condition of the two and found that their physiological functions were all normal. There were no signs of disorder in the vital essence in their bodies. It was as if they were sleeping peacefully. After a long while, when Xianxia was sure that the two of them were not in any danger, he gently kissed Qin Ruoying's forehead. Then, he got up and walked out of the west wing. It was still raining heavily outside. The three little guys were still jumping excitedly in the rain. Xianxia subconsciously glanced in the direction of the main hall, but just happened to meet Qin Yongyan's gaze. Obviously, his father-in-law also noticed something strange. But due to his limited ability, he could only put all his hopes on Xianxia. Xianxia nodded slightly at Qin Yongyan. Then, Chapter 365. Above the sky, amidst the dark clouds, Xianxia silently sensed all the tiny movements around him. A massive spirit energy tide that he had never seen or heard of before was surging wantonly in front of his eyes. It was only at this moment that Xianxia suddenly realized, the area covered by this rain was too large. If one stood on the moon and looked at the earth, they could clearly see, the entire northeastern hemisphere was shrouded in huge cloud cyclones one after another. From the Malay archipelago in the south to Siberia in the north, almost half of Asia was covered by these huge cloud cyclones. The center of each cyclone was the place with the densest spirit energy. At a rough count, there were at least 7 or 8 cyclones. There was one in Shangjing, one in Qinling, one in Donghai, one in Karakoram, one in Taklamakan. Everywhere that had appeared before, a spirit energy tide appeared at the same time today. In other words, if the divine gates suddenly opened, it would definitely appear in these places. Usually, it would come one by one, but today, so many appeared at the same time. What was the secret behind it? Xianxia didn't know, and he was too lazy to think about it. Because at this moment, there was only one thought left in his mind, and that was, completely block the divine gate. For Yingying, for Nianyan, for their family of 3 to live a happy and stable life, since opening the divine gate required a huge amount of spirit energy, then he wanted the spirit energy tide to never appear. From now on, he would be the dragon-breaking stone that stood between the two worlds. Wherever the spirit energy tide appeared, he would definitely be there. He wanted to completely cut off any connection between the two worlds. Disperse. This rain was not accompanied by lightning or thunder, but after Qianxi roared at the sky, a series of deafening rolling thunder suddenly sounded in the sky. Boom! In an instant, the sky was like an army of thousands of soldiers and horses facing the enemy. The sound of drums was endless and rumbling. With Qianxi as the center, a cyclone began to expand rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Because it was spinning too fast, there were even white stripes visible to the naked eye on the inner wall of the cyclone. These stripes were like sharp blades, forming a meat grinder, enough to tear anything caught in the cyclone into pieces. The sky wailed, and the dark clouds roared in anger. Accompanied by the incessant flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder, Qianxi was like a black hole, pulling in all the clouds and cyclones in the world and sucking them in bit by bit. This was the true power of the divine transformation stage. When Qianxi went all out, he could affect every corner of this planet. At this moment, he was like a Taotai from ancient times. He opened his mouth and crazily devoured the spiritual energy of heaven and earth on earth. Because only in this way could he immediately calm down the raging tide of spiritual energy. Unfortunately, Qianxi had overestimated himself. After all, Earth was no longer the dead planet of the last days that didn't even have a celestial being. After tens of thousands of years of silence, this decaying cultivation planet finally glowed with new vitality. The tide of spiritual energy was the beginning of everything. This was not something that Qianxi could stop by himself. Under the wheels of the Great Era, he was like a mantis that stretched out its arms to stop the car from moving forward. Even if he had to die, he would not hesitate. Ah! After Qianxi let out a long roar, a huge figure suddenly appeared behind him. It was the Dharma form. It looked just like him, but its body was more than 20 meters tall. It stood proudly in the sky like a god. Surging spiritual energy continued to surge into his body. Qianxi was like a balloon that was constantly inflating. There would be a time when he could not bear it anymore. Therefore, he urgently needed a channel to vent. This world, unsurprisingly, it became the channel for him to vent. In the blink of an eye, countless sword lights shot out, targeting the center of the cyclones one after another. Boom! Boom! Wherever the sword auras went, there would be a thunderous explosion in the air. For a moment, more than half of Asia was filled with earth-shattering thunder. Boom! Boom! The sword auras covered 30,000 miles, and one sword aura chilled 19 continents. If the heavens were in my way, I would smash the heavens. If the earth was in my way, I would flatten the earth. Qianxi crazily grasped the spiritual energy of heaven and earth while constantly detonating the center of the cyclones with the sword auras, trying to stop the tide from surging at the root. A big ship sank because of a small hole. 100 feet dike collapsed because of an ant's nest. The method Qianxi used seemed violent, but in fact, it was simple and effective. After his desperate series of attacks, the surging tide of spiritual energy was forcibly contained by him. The tide gradually receded, and the clouds and cyclones dissipated one by one. The dark clouds in the sky also dispersed, and the warm sun shone on the earth again. At this time, Qianxi's pale face showed a smile with difficulty. It was finally calm. However, just as Qianxi dragged his tired body and was about to return to Shangjing, a voice full of anger suddenly rang in his ears. "It's you! How dare you destroy the sacred ancestors' foundation? You're blocking my way to Tiandu. Hateful, hateful, hateful." This person's tone was filled with incomparable resentment, as if he had a grudge against Qianxi for killing his father and stealing his wife. In the 3 hateful words in a row, there was an undisguised killing intent. This enmity was absolutely irreconcilable. After hearing this voice, Qianxi was a little confused for a moment. Because this voice came out of nowhere, intermittent, and sounded a little strange, as if a voice changer was turned on, causing the voice to be distorted. However, Chen Shi still understood this person's words. In this regard, Chen Shi was unexpectedly mischievous. He imitated Fong Tangjing in the 9th grade Sesame official and shouted towards the sky with a cheeky face, not satisfied. "Come and hit me, come and hit me." As he spoke, he twisted and turned in the air proudly. In fact, Chen Shi wasn't sure if the other party could hear his ridicule. Since the other party couldn't pass through the void and directly pressed him to the ground and beat him up, then this person definitely couldn't be the Tai Ching sacred ancestor. This person's cultivation was probably about the same as his, but the other party had touched the threshold of the word void, so he could directly talk to him from the great world. "You little thief! I'm so angry. Today, I swear that when the generals of Tiandu return, it will be the time to tear you into pieces. Remember this." Hearing this, Chen Shi laughed disdainfully. Immediately after, he acted out of character and directly raised his middle finger towards the sky. At the same time, he didn't forget to ridicule. "Remember this, my ass." Obviously, that person was so angry that he couldn't speak, so he could only let out a roar of anger and helplessness. However, at this moment, the last cloud cyclone completely dissipated. The tide of spirit qi receded. That person's voice stopped abruptly, as if it had never appeared. Everything returned to silence. Chen Shi immediately withdrew the smile on his face. Chapter 366. This sudden thunderstorm also cooled down the excitement of the National Day celebration. As soon as Chen Shi stepped through the Chuehua gate, the little fellow, who was playing hide-and-seek with the two brothers in the yard, focused on him. Then, the little thing's eyes immediately lit up. "Papa! Where did you go?" As she spoke, she ran excitedly to Chen Shi. The cute way she ran looked like a puppy at home. When she saw her owner come back, she would enthusiastically rush up and wag her tail. Of course, Nian was not a puppy. She was the most precious treasure in the world. Papa just went out because he had something to do. How was it? Did you have fun? Yes. I like the rain. It's fun. What's fun? Look at your clothes. They're soaking wet. Don't you feel cold? Hearing this, the little thing immediately shook her head like a rattledrum, and then said with certainty, "Not cold." "You're really not cold?" "Not cold." Looking at the little fellow's resolute look, it seemed that she really did not feel cold. However, as soon as the little fellow's voice fell, a cold wind suddenly blew over from nowhere. Her clothes were already a little wet, and after being blown by the cold wind, she could not help but shiver. Well, now she knew it was cold. The little fellow subconsciously pressed her body close to Chen Shi's chest, and then could not help but whisper, "It seems a little cold. It's good that you know it's cold. Don't play outside for too long when it rains, or the cold air will get into your body and make you sick. If you get sick, you have to take very bitter medicine. Do you understand?" Understood, the little fellow had not taken medicine for a long time. But when Chen Shi mentioned the word medicine, she immediately recalled the bitter feeling, and her little nose wrinkled. "Let's go take a shower and change clothes." After the purpose of educating was achieved, Chen Shi held the little fellow and called the two brothers to follow him into the west wing. As soon as she entered the door, the little fellow saw Qin Ruoying and Qin Xueqing lying on the bed, so she immediately warned them in a low voice, "Shu. Mama is sleeping. Don't disturb her." "All right," the two brothers nodded in unison, then tiptoed into the bathroom. After all, Nian was a girl. Chen Shi naturally couldn't let her take a bath with the two brothers, so he had to wash the two brothers first before it was the little fellow's turn. Although Chen Shi's mood wasn't very good at the moment, but when facing the three children, he still showed enough patience. Even though the two brothers were very naughty when they were bathing, Chen Shi did not vent his anger on them. Children were always carefree. No matter what the situation was, happiness would always be the first thing in their hearts. Therefore, more than half an hour had passed by the time Qianxi helped the three little fellows wash up, and their clothes were dried by Qianxi with Qianxi. Okay, go out and play. Wait, what do you want to eat tonight? Dad will make it for you later. Braised pork ribs. After casually throwing out such a sentence, the little fellow hurriedly ran out of the west wing. Okay, got it. After Qianxi responded with a smile, he slowly walked to Qin Ruoying's side. Looking at his lover lying quietly on the bed, Qianxi couldn't help but gently leave a kiss on her forehead. After a kiss, the sister-in-law next to him suddenly made a soft moan, as if she had a nightmare. Qianxi was about to reach out to check the situation, but Qin Xueqing jumped up from the bed like a frightened cheetah, and then kicked Qianxi's head. Stop. It's me. In front of Qianxi, the sister-in-law would never have any possibility of resistance. He just casually glared at Qin Xueqing, and Qin Xueqing suddenly fell on the bed like a robot without power. Let's talk, what did you see before you fainted? The sister-in-law was a celestial being, and her foundation was much thicker than Qin Ruoying's, so the information she provided was naturally more useful. After Qin Xueqing was pressed on the bed by Qianxi, she was completely awake. The sister-in-law twisted her body and found that she couldn't move, so she couldn't help but blush and scold Qianxi, "Hey, let go of me." But this tone. Why does it sound a little strange? Get up, do you want to drink water? No. Qin Xueqing seemed to dislike the feeling of being controlled by Qianxi, so her attitude wasn't very good after she got up. But when she saw Qin Ruoying, the expression on her face slightly stiffened. Then Qin Xueqing quickly shifted her gaze to the window, and then said, "I saw a lot of people. Those people seemed to be walking on clouds and flying in the sky, and they were wearing very strange clothes, a bit like ancient people. Behind them was a very, very big palace, even bigger than the Forbidden City. They were all looking at me. Maybe they weren't looking at me. Anyway, from my point of view, they were looking at me. I saw the hostility in their eyes, and the murderous intent. I don't know how to describe that feeling to you. At that moment, I felt like Sun Wukong, who wreaked havoc in heaven, standing outside the southern heavenly gate, facing the gods and Buddhas in the sky alone." Qin Xueqing frowned, trying hard to recall the scene she saw at that time. When Qianxi heard this last sentence, the corner of his mouth suddenly hooked up into a shallow arc. "They weren't looking at you, they were looking at me." Looking at you? Why would they look at you? After hearing Qianxi's words, Qin Xueqing shifted her gaze to him. She was really confused now, and really didn't understand the situation. Why did she suddenly faint? The people she saw in the dream, who exactly were they? His sister-in-law was confused, but Qianxi had no intention of explaining. He leaned over and touched Qin Ruoying's cheek, then immediately got up and walked straight out of the door. "I'm going out first. If she wakes up early, remember to tell her I'll be back soon." Qin Xueqing felt that something was wrong with Qianxi, and suddenly couldn't help but blurt out, "Wait. Where are you going?" Qianxi stopped in his tracks. Qin Xueqing looked at him, and then added in a slight panic, "You didn't even tell me where you were going. How can I tell my sister where you're going?" Seeing that his sister-in-law was so concerned, Qianxi had to soften his tone, and smiled at her. "Don't worry, I'm just going to Daoist Island to get something. I'll be back soon." Chapter 367. Daoist Island. Heron Island, the pavilion in the middle of the lake. As the saying goes, the cicada senses the golden wind before it moves, sending the impermanence of death without knowing it. Ever since Jiang Zhengqing was injured by that outsider who came out of nowhere, the sky above Daoist Island seemed to be shrouded in thick dark clouds. Everyone in the clan was anxious, and the atmosphere was gloomy. Everyone seemed to be more cautious than usual. As the clan leader, Jiang Yuankue did not step forward to appease everyone at such a critical time. Instead, he stayed on Heron Island all day, doing something unknown. Everyone thought that the clan leader was planning something big, but no one knew. Jianghu himself was confused. Apart from preserving the most complete inheritance, the Jiang clan also had an immortal old monster who had lived for thousands of years. Based on this alone, Daoist Island was destined to have too many secrets that no one knew. The great ancestor's seniority was there. Once the old man spoke, Jianghu naturally had to bow and listen. The great ancestor's words were simple. He wanted him to wait outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake and wait patiently for the fated person to appear. The fated person? Who was the fated person? Who was the fated person? The great ancestor's words must have a deeper meaning, so Jianghu had been thinking about this question for the past few days. However, no matter how hard he thought about it, he could not come up with a reliable answer. Until this day, a sudden tide of spiritual energy enveloped the entire world. As the place with the densest spiritual energy within 100 miles, a cloud vortex inevitably appeared in the sky above Daoist Island. This scene was very similar to the scene described in Immortals at the Magpie Bridge. When the golden wind and the jade do meet, it surpasses countless things in the human world. It was only at this moment that Jianghu suddenly realized, the sky had changed. Sure enough, when sword rays streaked across the sky and shot toward the vortex from afar, Jianghu finally understood who the fated person the great ancestor was talking about was. In this world, there was actually someone who was unwilling to ascend to the great world, and was instead trying his best to stop the divine gate from opening? Going against the entire great world with his own strength. What kind of courage was this? Even Jianghu could not help but be fascinated. However, Jianghu was the clan leader after all. He had to think carefully about everything. Therefore, in the next moment, a thought suddenly popped up in his mind. If the divine gate could not be opened, who was the biggest beneficiary? Weren't they the 5 lands of legacy? Even though the old ancestor had never explicitly mentioned it, Jianghu was keenly aware of the problem at this moment. When the spirit chi on Earth began to recover, what was the difference between Earth and the Great World? The desert had already become an oasis, so why would the people need to migrate again? On Earth, they were the high and mighty Jiang clan. But in the Great World, they were sinners who were as lowly as ants. Since that was the case, why was the Jiang clan still anxiously waiting for the gate of heaven to open? Isn't it good to stay on Earth? Thinking of this, Jianghu couldn't help but look back at the pavilion in the middle of the lake. His face suddenly revealed a complicated expression of worry and joy. Could it be, the elder ancestor really had such a plan? Jianghu stood at the bridgehead, letting his imagination run wild. At this moment, a figure suddenly appeared in the sky above Daoist Island. Following that, he passed through the formation at an extremely fast speed and landed outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Only when that person opened the door curtain and made a slight movement did Jianghu's heart suddenly tremble. He quickly turned around and angrily shouted, "Who is it? How dare you trespass into the forbidden area of my clan?" However, before he could step forward to stop him, the elder ancestor's voice slowly came from the house. "Yuenkue, you can leave first." Hearing this, Jianghu couldn't help but stop. He quickly bowed and replied, "Yes. Also, pass on my order. Ring the 9-dragon bell and summon all the elders in the clan. I have something important to announce to everyone." 9-dragon bell? Hearing this, Jianghu subconsciously opened his eyes wide. He even suspected that he had heard wrongly. The elder ancestor seemed to have noticed his abnormality, so he spoke again to confirm it. "Go, ring the 9-dragon bell." "Yes, elder ancestor." This time, he finally heard it clearly. Therefore, Jianghu immediately went to the bell tower by the lake. After taking a deep breath, he was full of excitement. He pushed the hammer hard and rang the ancient bronze bell in front of him that hadn't been rung for thousands of years. Dong! 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 The heavy and distant sound of the bell suddenly rang out, startling tens of thousands of birds on the island. Before the bell rang for the 9th time, the bridge outside the pavilion in the middle of the lake was already densely packed with people. Among these people, the ones with the lowest cultivation were diviners. Among them were Jiang Yuankui's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and the various Jiang clan ancestors. It was obvious that they were the core strength of the Jiang clan. These people used to represent the glory of the Jiang clan, but now they were representing the future of the Jiang clan. With the continuous recovery of the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the shackles of heaven and earth had been completely broken. In this short 1 year, many diviners had appeared in the Jiang clan. Among them, there were even those above diviners led by Jiang Zhengqing. The future had come, and it had arrived. The Jiang clan was like a ferocious beast entrenched on Daiyu Island. At this moment, it finally revealed its ferocious and terrifying true face. Among the people by the lake, Jiang Yuankui's seniority was the lowest. However, due to his status as the current patriarch, Jiang Yuankui was fortunate enough to stand in the first row of the bridge. The entire place was silent. One could hear a pin drop. Everyone lowered their heads and ears, quietly waiting for the old ancestor to speak. No one knew who the old ancestor was talking to, nor did they know the content of their conversation. In short, after a long, long time, the old ancestor's voice suddenly rang out, instantly shaking everyone's hearts. I am Jiang Yan, the 17th generation patriarch of the Jiang clan. Today, I declare, the Jiang clan will form an alliance with Mr. Chen and fight against Tiandu together. In ancient times, what crime did the Jiang clan commit? But the divine ancestor, for his own selfish reasons, listed our Jiang clan as sinners and suffered the pain of being trapped for 10,000 years. However, there is no need for such a crime. Today, we will follow Mr. Chen to expel the heavenly gate and break off Tiandu's path of retreat in order to protect our homeland. This is to inherit the legacy of our ancestors, where righteousness lies. All the clansmen of the Jiang clan should take this as their responsibility. Everyone knows this. This sudden declaration of war instantly stupefied all of the Jiang clan clansmen present. The old ancestor wanted to crusade against Tiandu? Didn't the clan often offer sacrifices and pray for Tiandu to open a door so that the clansmen could ascend to the great world? Why did he suddenly want to rebel and go against Tiandu with the banner of Tiandu? Perhaps because the news came too suddenly, everyone was unable to accept it for a while. Many hot-tempered clansmen risked disobeying the old ancestor and kept asking why in a loud voice. One had to know that the great world was the immortal world that everyone dreamed of. What was the purpose of a person's life? If it weren't for the limited conditions on earth, how could they be trapped in the heavenly realm? Only by going to the great world would they have the possibility of continuing to break through. Only by going to the great world and improving their realm could they live for another 100, 200, or even 1,000 years. Everyone had long had enough of being unable to break through because of the shackles of heaven and earth. It wasn't that they couldn't do it, but that the conditions didn't allow it. And this was the fundamental reason why people felt sad. The crowd was restless. Everyone was questioning the old ancestor's decision. If it weren't for the fact that the direct descendants of Jiang Yuankui were still trying to appease everyone, many people would have already rushed into the pavilion in the middle of the lake and demanded an explanation from the old ancestor. Just when the situation was out of control, a figure suddenly lifted the curtain and slowly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. So annoying. A bunch of short-sighted people. Sorry, my friend got married the day before yesterday. His hometown is really too far away. It takes 5 hours by car. When he gets there, he has to help out in all kinds of ways. He's really exhausted. I started to sleep when I got home last night. I'm finally full of energy today. I hope everyone can forgive me. Chapter 368. A hint of surprise flashed across everyone's faces when they saw the young man who suddenly walked out of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. It was true that cultivators could retain their youth forever and even regain their youthful vigor, but this was based on a strong foundation of cultivation. The person in front of them looked so young, which meant, he was either a young man who was still wet behind the ears or an old man who had been through a lot. The former was almost impossible, so only the latter was left. Is this the Mr. Chen who injured Jianghu? I think so. I was a little late that day. When I got there, the elder ancestor had already asked him to move to Heron Island, so I only saw his back, but looking at this figure, this should be Mr. Chen without a doubt. I heard that Jianghu couldn't even take one hit from this person. Is this true? Yes, Jianghu probably underestimated his opponent. After all, he just broke through to the above divinity stage, so it's inevitable that he's a little impetuous. Based on Mr. Chen's previous battle record, this person should have already stepped into the above divinity stage. It makes sense that he could easily defeat Jianghu. I see. Everyone whispered to each other. At the same time, they had their own thoughts, but no one expressed them. Everyone heard the elder ancestor's words, but whether they agreed or not was another matter. Forming an alliance with Mr. Chen to fight against Heaven Capital? Putting aside the fact that Mr. Chen dared to make an enemy out of Heaven Capital, just the Jiang clan alone, could it really be that they could wrestle with the ancient cultivators in the Great World? Any random divine general who came out of the Divine Gate could probably clean up Daoist Island from top to bottom. In fact, even Chen Shi felt that this was a little unbelievable. He had only come to ask the elder ancestor for the 500-year-old ginseng flower, hoping to use it to heal the internal injuries on his body. But he did not expect, when the elder ancestor confirmed that he was the one who defeated this rare spirit tide, he immediately expressed that he wanted to form an alliance with him to stop the Divine Gate from opening. What was going on? After thinking about it seriously, Chen Shi finally understood the elder ancestor's intentions. On Earth, the Jiang clan was one of the 5 great lands of heritage respected by everyone. But in the Great World, the Jiang clan was the descendant of a sinner who didn't even have the qualifications to enter the sect. It was a very simple multiple-choice question, wasn't it? However, due to the slave nature of his subconscious mind, even Chen Shi felt that going against the Great World was simply courting death. Instead, it was this old man who had lived for over 1,000 years who saw through the essence of it at a glance and made the most correct choice. Blocking the heavenly gate and separating the two realms. Only in this way would the Jiang clan truly welcome its own glory. But unfortunately, the truth is always in the hands of the minority. Chen Shi stood at the head of the bridge and silently sized up the people in front of him. However, these people were looking at him with hostile gazes. Chen Shi didn't have any reaction to this. Because he knew, someone would stand up for him. As expected. Just as the crowd was discussing animatedly, a stern shout exploded in everyone's ears like a sudden clap of thunder. Lonesome. A bunch of short-sighted people. If it weren't for the fact that I already have half a foot in the yellow spring, why would I place such high hopes on you people? This old man has lived for over 1,000 years and has long seen the change of dynasties and the change of masters of mountains and rivers. You people count on the heavenly gate to ascend, but the heavenly gate hasn't opened for a long time. Now that it opens again and again, you people don't reflect on the deeper meaning behind it. Instead, you are like hungry dogs begging for food, wishing that you could ascend immediately. Those who have such thoughts are truly ignorant, short-sighted, unable to distinguish right from wrong, and causing harm in the evening. This old man stands here today to tell you all, misfortune is a blessing in disguise, and a blessing in disguise. Thousands of years have passed, and circumstances have changed with the passage of time. China has been restored, and the spiritual energy is torrential. You people count on ascending to the upper realm, but you don't know that the people of the upper realm I also want to return to the divine great land and fight against you all." As soon as these words came out, everyone was shocked. The ancient cultivators were coming back. Why? Why? Wasn't it because the great world was just a crack in the depths of the universe? Therefore, there was actually a fundamental difference between it and Earth. Earth was a planet with life, a holy land for cultivation. Even if there was a period of time when the spirit chi was weak, this situation was only temporary. However, this short period of time might be very long for humans. It could be thousands of years, or tens of thousands of years, or even hundreds of thousands of years, or even millions of years. But for a planet with a lifespan of 10 billion years, 1 million years was too short, and 10 million years was too short. Even 100 million years only occupied 1% of its lifespan. And the great world? It was just a crack in the void, and it might suddenly close one day. Without the constant support of a planet with life, no matter how rich the spiritual energy in the great world was, there would be a day when it would be exhausted. They were both spiritual energy, but one was a renewable resource, and the other was a non-renewable resource. The difference between the two was like heaven and earth. Humans had to learn to be vigilant in times of peace. Therefore, the main point was not whether the spiritual energy in the great world was exhausted, but, the spiritual energy on earth had begun to recover. Since that was the case, why not return to earth in advance to preserve the resources of the great world and deal with the next age of chaos? Therefore, just as the person behind the heavenly gate said, the return of Tiandu, it had to be done. The reason why the old man was able to see through this before Qin Shi was because his thoughts were different from hers. Qin Shi only wanted a family of 3 to live a peaceful life, while the old man wanted to take advantage of the situation and rise up in response to the heavens, thereby changing the fate of the Jiang family in one fell swoop. If they could really cut off the connection between the two worlds, then from now on, the Jiang family would be the most powerful legacy force in the world. Tens of thousands of years of accumulation, it was time to welcome the day when it would explode. Perhaps because there was an outsider like Qin Shi present, the old man's lecture did not last for too long, and many of his words were not that straightforward. However, since he had already flipped out, naturally, no one dared to jump out and question him. The scene quickly quieted down, and everyone lowered their heads, pretending to be docile. A gentle breeze blew, ruffling the calm surface of the lake. After a long while, the old man's voice sounded again. "Yuan Kuei, pass on my command, open the seal, pluck the Adumbra flower, and give it to Mr. Chen." Jiang Yuankui was stunned for a moment, somewhat doubting whether he had heard wrongly. The Adumbra flower? As long as one was a member of the Jiang family, there was not a single person who had not imagined that they would be the fated person for this flower. Jiang Zhengqing had dared to force Jiang Yuankui to hand over the Adumbra flower during the clan sacrifice ceremony because he had relied on his cultivation above the heavenly man level and was certain that the elder ancestor would not do anything to him. After all, one should not let one's own fertile water flow into one's own fields. But now, the elder ancestor wanted to give this rare flower to an outsider. Could it be that he had heard wrongly? Jiang Yuankui was completely dumbfounded, so after hearing the old man's words, he still stood in the same spot, unmoving. However, before the Jiang family members present could voice their doubts, the old man's voice rang out again. Ancestor Yushan left behind this Adumbra flower before he ascended, and left a prophecy. This flower belongs to the fated person. Since the fated person has already been found, then it's time to pluck this flower. Go, pass on my command, give the Adumbra flower to Mr. Chen. Chapter 369. The Adumbra flower. Upon hearing these words, even Chen Shi couldn't help but reveal an astonished expression. He really didn't expect that the Adumbra flower would exist on Earth. The words of the Adumbra flower were auspicious. It only appeared once every 3,000 years and was a heavenly flower that didn't exist in this world. But in reality, the Adumbra flower's seedlings weren't very rare. What was truly rare was its 3,000-year flowering period. A whole 3,000 years. One had to know that with Qianxi's current cultivation, he could barely live for 2,000 years. But this Adumbra flower needed 3,000 years of cultivation before it could fully mature and bloom. Just based on this growth period alone, it was destined that this strange flower would have extraordinary effects. According to the rumors in the pugilistic world, even if an ordinary person consumed this flower, he or she would be able to become an immortal and ascend to the heavens. He or she would immediately live as long as the heavens and the earth and be as old as the sun and moon. Of course, this was just an unreliable rumor. When Qianxi was in the heavenly spiral continent, he had heard that a mature Adumbra flower had appeared in the north. During that time, countless immortal cultivators rushed to the north almost every day in an attempt to obtain this flower. This flower was like a food shortage on an isolated island. Naturally, it would attract the attention of countless wild beasts. But, there was only one Adumbra flower, but tens of thousands of immortal cultivators had participated in the fight for it. Naturally, a bloodbath had begun because of this. Countless people had paid the price with their lives. More than half of the north had become a living hell, a furnace of flesh and blood. So much so that even after this incident had died down, the words, Adumbra flower, could still cause people's expressions to change. With Qianxi's personality, he naturally didn't want to participate in this kind of fight. But this didn't mean that he wasn't interested in the Adumbra flower. If the ancient records were correct, this flower was a rare treasure. It had the miraculous effect of nourishing one's golden core and nourishing one's soul. If an ordinary person consumed it, they could even complete a transformation in an extremely short amount of time and condense a golden core. What kind of concept was this? A golden core. A lifespan of 500 years. If an ordinary person could directly advance to a golden core after consuming it, how powerful would its effects be if it was used as medicine, refined, and then given to immortal cultivators to consume? When he thought of this, Qianxi suddenly felt a sense of excitement. However, this feeling was not for himself, but for Qin Ruoying, who was still lying in bed. It was laughable that he had been constantly fighting with Jiang Jingqing in the open and in the shadows all these years. Who would have thought that in the end, he had made a wedding dress for someone else? How could Jiang Yuankue not be angry? But although he was angry, he still had to listen to the old ancestors' orders. The seal was on the stone platform on the other side of the lake. Through the clan leader's imprint, Jiang Yuankue quickly opened the seal and saw the full appearance of the Adumbra flower with his own eyes. This was a plant that had never appeared on Earth before. If he really had to describe it, its appearance was somewhat like a Inga pineapple. Its leaves were like fans and its entire body was sparkling and translucent. It was as if it was made of crystal and its fine hair could be seen. As soon as the seal was opened, a refreshing fragrance wafted out with the breeze. Jiang Yuankue only took a breath and felt his entire body relax, as if he had an inexhaustible energy. The flower was a strange flower, but it was as weak as a roadside rose. Jiang Yuankue only used a little force and plucked this strange flower that people yearned for day and night. It was unknown if it was because the desire in his heart was too strong, but after Jiang Yuankue plucked the Adumbra flower, he forgot himself and put it on the tip of his nose to sniff it. As the eldest son of the direct descendant, Jiang Fengyan naturally had to stay by Jiang Yuankue's side. At this moment, he saw that Jiang Yuankue was in a daze after receiving the flower, so he could not help but remind him, "Father, the seal is not closed yet. Why don't I take it?" Hearing this, Jiang Yuankue seemed to wake up from a dream. He looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with a flustered expression, then said in a slightly embarrassed manner, "Ahem. Go, I'll close the seal. You go and present this flower to Mr. Chen." After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuankue carefully handed the Adumbra flower to Jiang Fengyan. At this moment, the father and son's expressions were like torchbearers passing the Olympic flame. They looked exceptionally serious. However, the next moment, something unexpected happened. After Jiang Fengyan received the Adumbra flower, he seemed to have gone crazy. He took off running in the opposite direction. This unexpected change stunned Jiang Yuankue for a moment. By the time he came back to his senses, Jiang Fengyan had already run nearly 100 meters away. He must have used all his strength. Fengyan? What are you doing? Hurry up and get back here. Jiang Fengyan was only one step away from becoming a diviner. Running at full speed, his speed was naturally extremely fast. Seeing this, Jiang Yuankue could not help but feel anxious. Just as he was about to chase after him, he heard Jiang Fengyan roar without turning his head, "Father! Why should you give this flower to an outsider? The elder ancestor is unjust. I don't accept this." At this moment, Jiang Fengyan was like a child who had been wronged. After being scolded by an adult, he wanted to escape from this place as far as possible. However, among the people present, the person with the lowest cultivation was a diviner. How could he tolerate such nonsense? Jiang Fengyan had probably thought of this as well. Therefore, while he was running, he grabbed the Adumbra flower and stuffed it into his mouth. Since his father could not have it, then no one else could. He would die today. Chapter 370. People were always greedy. The so-called 5 poisonous hearts of Buddhism: greed, anger, stupidity, hesitation, and doubt. In ancient books it was often mentioned that lust was the leader of all evils, but this lust did not refer to sex, but to indulge and indulge without restraint, which was also greed. That is, the source of all evils. Greed was the leader of all evils. Greed, in fact, was the root of all troubles. Could it be that Jiang Fengyan really took the Adumbra flower because he refused to accept the decision of the ancestor? People often said, even if you have money, you need to be alive to spend it. But this Adumbra flower was a rare treasure that could not be bought with money. And the most important point was, this flower was easy to take, and one only needed to open their mouth and swallow the flower, and it would immediately take effect. In the face of such a strong temptation, even someone with a firm heart like Jiang Yuankue could not help but feel greedy, let alone Jiang Fengyan, a young man who was still wet behind the ears. Therefore, Jiang Fengyan decided to gamble with his little life. As long as he cooked the rice, the ancestor should not do anything to him because he was the eldest son of the direct line of descent. No matter what, Jiang Fengyan was still a pure-blooded Jiang clansman. Even if he took the Adumbra flower, it would just flow to his family's field. It had to be said that Jiang Fengyan was indeed very bold. But he neglected the most important question, and that was, how far could he run? When he was caught, would he be able to successfully swallow this Adumbra flower? Jiang Fengyan overestimated his speed and greatly underestimated the pursuit he would face. In fact, the moment Jiang Fengyan ran away, Xianxia had already noticed something was wrong. The reason why he did not immediately take action was actually because he wanted to see if they could solve this problem on their own for the sake of the old man. After all, he was just a guest who came to visit. How could a guest go to the kitchen to serve dishes by himself? Based on this consideration, Xianxia did not stop Jiang Fengyan. However, the Jiang clan members present seemed to have been struck dumb by this sudden turn of events. After a long while, a few people came back to their senses first, and then directly set off to chase. The speed of running was naturally not as fast as the speed of flying. But, Jiang Fengyan never thought of running away. He only wanted to use this opportunity to stall for time so that he could successfully swallow the entire Adumbra flower. Therefore, as soon as those people rose into the air, Jiang Fengyan had already stuffed the Adumbra flower into his mouth. Sigh. Seeing that it was too late to stop him, Xianxia could only sigh silently and prepare to do it himself. However, just as Xianxia was about to attack, the old man's voice suddenly exploded from the clouds, causing the entire Heron Island to tremble. "Evil creature! How dare you!" That voice was so loud that it sounded like the furious roar of a deity. Immediately afterward, a huge amount of true essence gushed out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The ferocity of its momentum was as if the heavens and earth were collapsing, and the mountains were collapsing and the earth was cracking. An incomparably surging Jin Yuan poured out from the pavilion in the middle of the lake. The lake water that was affected by the Jin Yuan suddenly sprayed up into the sky like a fountain. In that instant, raging waves filled the sky, and the mountains and rivers trembled. The entire Heron Island was trembling in the old man's anger. Seeing this, Jiang Yuankui was so scared that his liver and gallbladder were almost torn apart. He could only look up to the sky and shout in panic, "This child is not sensible. Ancestor, please show mercy and spare his life." Unfortunately, Jiang Yuankui's words were still too late. A water column suddenly rose from the lake and then shot toward Jiang Fengyan at an unimaginable speed. At that moment, time seemed to have stopped. Jiang Fengyan even maintained the posture of wanting to swallow the Adumbra flower as he ran. Boom! However, the huge wave arrived first. Like a flash flood, it instantly swallowed Jiang Fengyan whole. When the huge wave dissipated, the rocks, weeds, trees, and slopes where Jiang Fengyan was standing were all buried by the huge wave. As a result, the area within a few hundred meters had become a ruined scene after the flash flood. There was nothing left. Only broken trees, broken branches, and yellow soil were left on the ground. After seeing such a scene, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but feel sad. After rushing to the place where Jiang Fengyan was before, he completely disregarded his image and used his hands to search the soil. "Fengyan? Fengyan? Where are you? Father is here to save you. Where are you? Answer me." The so-called father and son were connected by heart. At this moment it was deeply reflected. Even if Jiang Fengyan had committed a heinous crime, Jiang Yuankui couldn't bear to see him suffer any harm. But how powerful was the ancestor's power? With just one move, everything in front of him was wiped out, including Jiang Fengyan. When he thought that his son might have been killed by the ancestor himself and died without a complete corpse, Jiang Yuankui couldn't help but lie in the soil and cry bitterly. But at this moment, the old man's voice sounded again. "Pass my order. Jiang Fengyan has committed a crime of disobedience. He is punished to meditate in the dry pool for 60 years. During this period, without my permission, he is not allowed to take a step out of the dry pool." The dry pool was the place where the Jiang clan punished sinners. There were all kinds of torturing formations set up in it. But the ancestor asked Jiang Fengyan to stay in there for 60 years, which was 60 years, this could already be considered the harshest punishment. But when Jiang Yuankui heard this sentence, it was as if he had heard great news. He quickly knelt on the ground and kowtowed while shouting, "Thank you ancestor for not killing me. Thank you ancestor for not killing me. Thank you ancestor for not killing me." After the old man made his move, this farce finally came to an end. As for the Adumbra flower that countless people yearned for day and night, under the old man's protection, it flew into Xianxia's hands, unharmed. The flower finally fell into the hands of the fated person. "Thank you." After reaching out to take the Adumbra flower, Xianxia turned around and looked at the pavilion in the middle of the lake with interest. The old man really hid it well. Just from this, Xianxia was enough to judge that the old man's strength at his peak was definitely not inferior to Bai Hong's. As expected of an old man who had lived for more than 1,000 years. He really did not make a move, but when he did, it was indeed shocking. Xianxia had always thought that after the old man lost his physical body, he had completely become the Jiang clan's mascot. Now it seemed that he had underestimated the heroes of the world. The old man must have mastered some secret technique that even he did not know about. That was why he could continue to cast spells without a physical body. To be honest, Chen Shi was now more and more interested in this old man. He hid too many secrets, and Chen Shi could not understand his motives at all. There was no such thing as a free lunch in this world. So here came the question. From the beginning, the old man had been especially attentive to him. Now, he did not hesitate to seriously injure his descendants to give him the Adumbra flower. Chapter 371. 1,000-year-old Go, the reincarnation of the Chicken King. If life was a survival competition, the old man's chances of winning the chicken dinner would be far greater than anyone else's. He wasn't afraid of his opponent being tough or reckless, he was only afraid of his opponent being cunning. If he really met such a wretched opponent, no matter how strong he was, he couldn't help but mutter in his heart. After all, who knew when this old fellow would pop out and stab him in the back? Chen Shi was indeed very interested in the old man's secrets. Thus, after obtaining the Adumbra flower, he was prepared to return to the pavilion in the middle of the lake to have a good chat with the old man. However, he had just taken a step when the old man's voice suddenly rang out again. Since Sir has already obtained the Adumbra flower, you should be returning from a rewarding journey today. There are many matters to attend to in the clan. You've also seen the farce just now, please don't take it to heart, I'll teach them a good lesson right now. I'll definitely make sure they remember what rules are, that's all for today. It's inconvenient for me to move around, please forgive me, Yuankue, help me send the guests off. After hearing the elder master's words, Jiang Yuankue immediately stood up from the soil and wiped the mud off his face. At the same time, he replied rather excitedly, Yuankue obeys. After he finished speaking, Jiang Yuankue shook violently and used his inner yuan to shake off all the mud and dust on his body. His entire person looked like a brand new person, as if he had just taken a bath. If the elder master had asked him to send the guests off, that meant, in the elder master's heart, he, Jiang Yuankue, was still the current clan leader of the Jiang clan. The elder master didn't hold a grudge against him because of what had just happened. How could Jiang Yuankue not be excited? Thus, he immediately ran over to Chen Shi eagerly. There's no need to send the guests off. Seeing that the old man was closing the door to his guests, Chen Shi could only smile and shake his head. No matter what, they were still considered allies now. Furthermore, he had received a greeting gift from the old man. Naturally, he couldn't cause any unhappiness with the old man over such a small matter. After all, they had just formed an alliance and were still in their honeymoon period. I came in a hurry today, so I didn't bring any gifts. Instead, I received a big gift from you for no reason. I'll remember this favor for now. Once I've refined this Adumbra flower into a pill, I'll bring a portion back for you. That way, your grandchildren won't blame me for stealing their good stuff. Having said that, Chen Shi shifted his gaze to the direction where Jiang Fengyan was just now. That location was originally a small forest. The forest was full of fragrant grass and flowers. It was indeed a place with excellent scenery. But unfortunately, after being struck by the old man in anger, all that was left of this place was a puddle of yellow soil and mud. It looked like an abandoned construction site on a rainy day. It was a messy scene. The scenery on Heron Island was picturesque. However, this scene was like a drop of ink accidentally spilled on a painting, completely destroying the beauty of the entire painting. This happened because of me. It's a pity for this forest. I don't want to ruin the beautiful scenery of the island because of this. Fine, then let it return to its original form. As he spoke, Chen Shi raised his hands and made a gesture. Immediately after, a flower formed by the condensation of vital qi slowly bloomed in his palm. After Chen Shi gently waved his hand, the glowing green flower flew straight to the ruins. The Jiang clan members present were somewhat confused. They had no idea what Xianxia was doing. The only thing they could confirm was, everyone was quite dissatisfied with Xianxia's words and deeds. They only felt that he was taking advantage of the situation and saying useless words. To be honest, instead of wasting time here, he might as well get out of Daoist Island as soon as possible. Out of sight, out of mind. Who didn't know how to say beautiful words? It was just a small forest. If it was destroyed, so be it. Did they need him to repair it? How was he going to repair it? He was just spouting nonsense. Because the elder ancestor had just flipped out, no one dared to directly express their dissatisfaction. They could only look at Xianxia with a rather strange expression. However, the next moment, something that caused everyone to be dumbstruck suddenly happened just like that. It was clearly early autumn, but Heron Island seemed to have ushered in the return of spring and the revival of all things. Green sprouts rapidly grew at a speed visible to the naked eye on the yellow soil and mud within a radius of a few hundred meters. Then, in the short span of a few breaths, these green sprouts grew into countless plants and flowers. Large trees were uprooted from the ground, and fresh flowers bloomed brilliantly. In an instant, fragrant grass covered the ground, and mountain flowers bloomed brilliantly. Although it was still a far cry from the lush greenery from before, it was no less than a miracle in everyone's eyes. Who present did not have the ability to destroy mountains and break rocks? However, it was undoubtedly a fantasy to ask them to revive all things and rejuvenate them. It was just like how humans had invented an unparalleled nuclear bomb but still had not found an effective way to cure cancer. Destruction was always easier than construction. As for them, clearly, they were still far from it. After Xianxia showed off his skills, the Jiang clan members present finally understood why the elder ancestor was so friendly to this outsider. As the saying went, knowing someone by their reputation was not as good as meeting them in person. The Jiang clan members present finally had a deep understanding of the three words, Mr. Chen. Sir, you have great skills. This old man has learned something today, the old man praised from the bottom of his heart. After Xianxia heard that, he smiled and waved his hand. He replied nonchalantly, "All right, I won't say any more pleasantries. I'll visit you another day. Goodbye." As soon as she finished speaking, Xianxia suddenly disappeared under the watchful eyes of the crowd. After he left, many Jiang clan members seemed to have come back to their senses. They hurriedly looked around, trying to find his departing figure. Xianxia was also very satisfied with his performance just now. Therefore, on the way back to Shangjing, he was still recalling that feeling in his mind. Compared to when he made Qing Shan wear the red makeup, his current methods could be considered to be more skillful. In fact, it could be counted as a spell, but it could also be counted as not. Because it included the use of vital essence and Xianxia's comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth. It was definitely not as simple as casting a spell. The laws of heaven and earth were a very mysterious thing. From the reincarnation of life and death, to the rotation of the sun and moon, to the rise of clouds and rosy clouds, to the blowing of the wind on the hills. Even if it was as small as gravel or dust, it contained a certain amount of the laws of heaven and earth. Just as the eminent monks often said, every sip and every bite was predetermined. There must be a reason for the Lanine silk fruit. This made Xianxia feel a little strange. After all, he usually did not cultivate at all. When he had time, he would accompany his wife and play with his children. Why did his comprehension of the laws of heaven and earth become deeper? Could it be, this was the so-called cultivation in the secular world? Only by experiencing the secular world could one taste the various forms of life and enjoy the 7 emotions and 6 desires. Since Tianxian already had the 3 paths of heartless, unruffled, and heartless. Then why couldn't he create a brand new emotional path based on his own experience? Benevolence, righteousness, propriety, wisdom, and trust, gentleness, respect, frugality, and tolerance. With the traditional virtues of Wuxia as the outline, he created his own path. Soon, a large table of delicacies was served. At this time, the shortcomings of the north had to be mentioned, and that was, the temperature difference between day and night was huge, and the sun set quickly. Just after 6 o'clock, the sky gradually darkened. When it was time to light the lanterns, the heavy rain had just stopped. Raindrops that had not yet dried up slowly rolled down from the leaves. Birds were looking out from under the eaves. The wind was cool, bringing with it the fragrance of the earth that came from nowhere. The little fellow looked up and saw a few stars blinking in the sky. "This song is so nice. Papa taught me. I learned it right away. It's very easy. Come, I'll teach you. Sing with me. The dark sky hangs low, and the bright stars follow. Insects fly, who are you thinking of?" In the brightly lit central room, the little fellow did not have stage fright in front of the big family. Instead, she clapped her hands and sang, "Insects fly," with her sweet voice. Although the brothers were a little embarrassed, they still plucked up the courage to sing with the little fellow under everyone's constant encouragement. The beautiful child's voice kept ringing in the room. For a moment, the big courtyard was a little more warm because of this. The 7-day holiday passed quickly. Xianxia also did as the little girl wished. In these few days, she took the two brothers to accompany her in Shangjing City to play to their heart's content. However, playing was one thing. When the holiday was over, she had to go to school. For this reason, the father and daughter held pinky hooks. Probably because she was in a good mood at that time, Nian also patted her chest and promised that she would go to kindergarten when school started. But, when it was the day of school, the little fellow stayed in bed and did not want to get up. Xianxia had no choice but to carry her to kindergarten. For this reason, Nian lost her temper. If she had not heard that the brothers had already gone to kindergarten, she would have been rolling on the ground. Then again, even adults had holiday syndrome, let alone a child who was only the size of a bean. Therefore, Xianxia could understand Nian's feelings. However, considering that the child was growing up day by day, preschool education was really important. Therefore, Xianxia could only bear the pain and play the role of a strict father for once. After all, this time, he could not give up halfway like before, right? When the father and daughter arrived at the school, there were already many parents sitting in the classroom with their children. In fact, compared with other children, Nian's performance was already very good. At least she did not cry, right? When she found the two brothers in the classroom, the performance of the three little fellows was even more outstanding. Chapter 373. Mr. Chen, can I give you a ride? The man in front of him was Wang Junsheng, who sat at the same table as Xianxia on the day Nian entered the school. Perhaps it was because of his age, but Wang Junsheng always gave off a mature and steady vibe. It was what people often referred to as manliness. When this kind of man smiled, even as a man, he could not help but be captivated by his charm and seriously think about every word he said. This was the charm of a mature man and had nothing to do with gender. If an analogy was to be made, a mature man was like a bottle of aged wine. The moment the bottle was opened, the fragrance was enough to attract everyone's attention. Obviously, Wang Junsheng wanted to use this opportunity to talk to Xianxia. But unfortunately, after Xianxia heard him, he waved his hand and smiled. "No need, my house is nearby. It's faster to take the small road back." After that, Xianxia did not even give Wang Junsheng a chance to speak again. He turned around and walked along the sidewalk. "Brother Wang, who is this guy? Since he's so shameless, why don't I just go and have a chat with him?" Zhao Ziyu was sitting in the driver's seat. After seeing Xianxia leave, he suddenly felt like he was insulted. He almost got out of the car to teach Xianxia a lesson. Talk? How? Kidnap him and talk? Wang Junchen coldly interrupted him. Hearing this, Zhao Ziyu suddenly became like a frosted eggplant and completely withered. It was not difficult to see that the two of them were not ordinary friends. Instead, it was more like a superior and subordinate relationship. Didn't you always say that you have eyes and ears in Beijing? It's been more than a month, how come there is no reliable news at all? Didn't we already investigate to Zhonghai? We even found the household register for you. If you ask me, this guy is just a bumpkin. Brother Wang, why do you care so much about him? How can a bumpkin get a kid into this school? Wang Junchen casually asked a rhetorical question and directly made Zhao Ziyu speechless. Actually, thinking about it, it made sense. Even though it was just a small kindergarten, the water inside was deep. From the first day the children stepped into this kindergarten, regardless of their future academic performance, they would definitely follow the pre-planned path all the way forward. They would go through childhood, primary, junior, high, and finally plunge into the top schools in the country, such as Qing, Bei, Run, Law, and so on. The only possible fork in the road was the choice between politics and business. Those in business could choose to study abroad, while those in politics had to stay in the country to further their studies. This was indeed the case. While the bumpkins were still warming up at the starting line, others were already drinking champagne and celebrating at the finish line. However, this was not to say that society was unfair. After all, ever since the fall of the Qing dynasty, whose ancestors were not farmers, other people had to go through at least 3 generations of accumulation before their children and grandchildren could enjoy the wealth they had today. Alright, let's leave it at that. I just thought that this person wasn't simple, so I wanted to make friends with him. Since she's unwilling, let's put this matter aside for now. Anyway, the child is still young. Let's see how it goes in the future. The car with the Beijing A license plate slowly drove away. At this time, Chen-Shi, who had already walked more than 100 meters away, suddenly turned her head to look at the car. Her face revealed a thoughtful expression. Time passed day by day. It was so peaceful that there was not a trace of ripple. In the blink of an eye, another month passed. Today was November 1st. It was Halloween abroad and Little Singles Day in China. The autumn air was refreshing, and the smell of osmanthus was wafting in the air. It was a good time to play. And from National Day until now, the only good news during this period was, Guyao's soul had finally stabilized and could move freely without the soul crystal. Although the soul could not speak, it could convey the emotions in her heart through the soul. Therefore, the moment Chen-Shi released her, he sensed the true feelings in Guyao's heart. She was very happy. Happy from the bottom of her heart. At this time, Guyao finally regained a little bit of her humanity. Although her IQ was still slightly lower than that of ordinary people, at least she was no longer a ferocious ghost who lacked brains. In addition to this matter, something else happened that made Chen-Shi quite depressed. That was, Nian no longer called him Papa in a coquettish voice. Thinking about this, Chen-Shi's heart immediately gave birth to 10,000 depression. That was because he always felt that the coquettish Papa sounded very intimate, but the clear Dad sounded more distant. Here, he had to mention the little guy's growth experience. Because Aunt Zhang was from Sichuan, the little guy grew up with her, and inevitably there was a little Sichuan flavor in his accent. The teachers in the kindergarten were all from Shangjing, so their pronunciation was naturally the most standard Mandarin pronunciation. For the teachers, a child's inaccurate pronunciation was a big problem. Therefore, when they were in school, they would always patiently correct the little guy's pronunciation. As time went by, of course, Papa was gone, and then only Dad was left. In this regard, Chen-Shi simply had to suffer in silence. There was a feeling of unspeakable bitterness. Bitter. Really bitter. Fortunately, other than this bitter matter, there was nothing else to worry about during this period. Although Qin Ruoying's cultivation progress was still very slow, Chen Shi was not anxious because of this. This was because he believed that as long as the Adumbra flower was refined into a pill, Yingying would definitely be able to use it to step into the diviner stage. However, how precious was the Adumbra flower? In the absence of other materials, even he did not dare to act rashly. Therefore, after nearly a month of thinking, Chen Shi finally came up with a more feasible prescription and prepared to officially start refining the pill. However, at this moment, the spirit energy tide appeared again. In the blink of an eye, black clouds rolled and covered half the sky. After a few thunderous rumbles, the heavy rain began to fall. Chen Shi walked out of the room and frowned. After observing for a while, he realized that the tide this time was not very turbulent. The center was also rather far from Shangjing. Seeing this, Chen Shi looked as if he had seen something happy. After shaking his head with a smile, he turned around and went back into the room. He was prepared to stay by Qin Ruoying's side and study her symptoms. The reason why Chen Shi did not immediately move to contain the tide was because he had reached an agreement with the old man. Therefore, the moment the spirit energy tide appeared, the entire Dayu Island was in an uproar. In just a moment, hundreds of diviners suddenly flew out of the island like birds, flying in flocks toward the center of the tide. It was as if hundreds of birds were flying through the sky. It was so majestic that it was a rare sight. Chapter 374. The celestial beings were out hunting, patrolling the heavens. Ever since Emperor Qin burned the books and buried the scholars, such a grand event had not happened in the divine land for a long time. Dayu Island's magical formation was activated. Over 300 celestial beings rushed valiantly toward the center of the tide, facing the rolling black clouds, flashing lightning, and rolling thunder. This moment was destined to be recorded in the annals of the Jiang clan. Because from this day on, the Jiang clan was no longer a clan of sinners abandoned by the divine ancestor. Under the leadership of the old ancestor, they would compose an epic that belonged to the Jiang clan in this divine great land that was once again filled with vitality. In fact, after the great ancestor made this decision, everyone knew what they were going to face. But at the same time, they also understood one thing, and that was, the strong often rose from humble beginnings. In front of the great world, the overall strength of Dayu Island was as insignificant as an ant. It could be said that any divine general from the heavenly gate had the ability to massacre the entire Dayu Island. After all, 300 celestial beings sounded like a lot, but they were only 300 pseudo-core immortal cultivators. They had not even truly condensed their gene dan. Of course, if these 300 celestial beings formed a formation and attacked and retreated together, even a divine general would not dare to face them head-on. However, this was only a theoretical concept. Because a divine general was not a wooden dummy. He only needed to employ guerrilla tactics. Through constant harassment, sneak attacks, and ambushes, how long would it take for him to kill 300 celestial beings? The gap between the two realms was simply too big. 1 against 100, 1 against 1,000. This was what an immortal cultivator should be capable of. If it had been in the past, the Jiang clan would definitely not have the delusion of going against the great world. They were just a lowly clan of sinners. When the spiritual energy was exhausted, they were like sand lizards wandering in the desert. They could only rely on eating maggots and rotten meat to sustain their lives. But suddenly, times had changed. With the continuous recovery of spiritual energy, the desert gradually became an oasis. Looking at the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards swarming toward the oasis, the sand lizards hesitated. Should they continue to live lowly, or should they stand up straight and fight the jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards to protect the oasis that originally belonged to them? If he took a gamble, he might end up enraging the ferocious beast, and in the end, he would end up without a corpse, then, he could continue to hide in the soil for the rest of his life, eating maggots and rotting meat, thank goodness. The Jiang clan still retained the last trace of bravery. In fact, how could Jiang Zhengqing be talented? He must have a screw loose in his head. When a normal person saw such a shocking heavenly anomaly, their first reaction would definitely be to avoid it. However, Jiang Zhengqing insisted on doing the opposite. No matter what kind of heavenly anomaly it was, he wanted to use this opportunity to train himself. His breakthrough stemmed from the spiritual energy tide that had appeared last time. It was just like how Yonggui used the black iron heavy sword to practice swordsmanship under the waterfall, increasing his strength through resisting the waterfall. When the spiritual energy tide appeared last time, Jiang Zhengqing just happened to be cultivating nearby. He felt that the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was especially turbulent, so he dived in without thinking and stepped into the heavenly man realm in one go. There was definitely danger. After all, the spiritual energy in the center of the whirlpool was far superior to the outside world. If one's cultivation was insufficient or had an unstable foundation, they might suffer from qi deviation if they weren't careful. They might even explode and die because they couldn't withstand the enormous spiritual energy. However, for a cultivator like Jiang Zhengqing who had been trapped in the heavenly man realm for many years due to the exhaustion of spiritual energy, how could this be dangerous? This was simply a great opportunity. Because his foundation had been tempered thousands of times, as long as there was enough spiritual energy of heaven and earth, he could condense a true golden core. In the past, the heavenly gate would always open with the spiritual energy tide. Everyone wanted to ascend to the great world through the heavenly gate, so they didn't realize at all, even if they didn't pass through the heavenly gate, they could use this opportunity to break through to the heavenly man realm. Therefore, with Jiang Zhengqing as an example, everyone carefully flew into the center of the whirlpool. If the spiritual energy tide was compared to a cake, then Chen Shi used brute force to smash the cake into mud with one slap. Chapter 375. Under Jiang Zhengqing's lead, the Jiang clan celestials plunged into the world-shaking waterspout. After that, the 300-plus celestials began to resist the power of the whirlpool while crazily absorbing the spiritual energy within it. Their bodies were like the earth in the desert. Due to the lack of water, they had already cracked and collapsed. After the heaven and earth spirit qi surged like a flood, their bodies seemed to have turned from cracked earth into fertile fields. The rain nourished the earth, causing the long dried-up desert to once again grow green sprouts. Everyone experienced a feeling that they had never felt before from this. Carefree. It was truly carefree. The rich and pure spiritual qi of heaven and earth was like a bottle of iced cola. The instant they drank it, they could clearly feel. An incomparably cool feeling continuously entered their throat, then passed through their internal organs, the major acupoints all over their body, and finally reached their limbs, bones, and the ends of their bodies. But regrettably, the tide of spiritual energy was not very strong to begin with. Thus, after the 300-plus celestials crazily devoured it like maggots, the waterspout shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. About half an hour later, the originally incomparably thick waterspout turned into a thin line of water. Then, it suddenly stopped rotating. Like a water ball that had been punctured, it collapsed in midair with a loud bang. Seawater continued to sprinkle down from the sky. The spiritual energy that had lost its restraint surged in all directions. Waves came one after another. In just a short while, everything had returned to normal. Just like that. It's over? Jiang Yuankui sat cross-legged in midair. Even after the stormy waves had completely calmed down, he still had a feeling of endless aftertaste. One could not blame him for losing his composure. After all, this feeling was truly too refreshing. Too many people came today. There's not enough to share. Alright, that's it then. Go back and properly enter seclusion for a while. Carefully savor the subtleties of this. You should be able to break through to Celestial very soon. Seeing that everyone seemed to want to continue, Jiang Zhengqing, who had experienced it before, couldn't help but laugh proudly. After laughing for a while, Jiang Zhengqing suddenly realized a problem. Perhaps the old ancestor had already anticipated the crux of the matter. That was why he made such a big show of making an enemy out of Tiandu. The tidal wave had already receded. The Jiang clan's heavenly clansmen stood up and prepared to return to Daiyu Island. Everyone seemed to be too preoccupied with the feeling just now, so even Jiang Zhengqing didn't notice it. Not long after they left, a figure suddenly rose from the sea. This was a young man in his early 20s. He was wearing an extremely retro white robe, and his hair was tied up in a bun. Coupled with the aloof temperament that he inadvertently exuded, this young man simply looked like a talented scholar who had walked out of an ancient painting. But the slightly strange thing was, this person clearly came out of the sea, but there was not a single drop of water on his body. Furthermore, he didn't even make any movements of stepping on the water. His body just floated straight up to the surface of the sea. When more than half of his body was out of the water, the young man walked out of the water step by step as if he was climbing a flight of stairs. Then, he stood 2 to 3 meters above the water. Master, oh, Master, could it be that you've even calculated this step? That's why you let me stay in the lower realm alone. But if you leave, your disciple will feel terrible. Yuhuan Tianzuan is really something. It wasn't easy for me to find a voice transmission talisman in the Misty Pavilion. As soon as I opened it, I didn't even have time to tell you that I'm safe. He ordered me to teach that person a lesson. He even said that it was for the sake of Tiandu's reputation. That's easy for him to say. Even senior brother Baihong wasn't a match for that person. How would I dare to provoke him? Alright, I know even if you don't say it, I can't go against the orders of the Heavenly Venerable. On this vast and boundless sea, apart from the constantly rising waves, there was probably only blue sky and white clouds left. It was obviously so lonely that even a bird could not be seen, but this young man was still looking up, as if he was talking to someone. Although you can't hear it, but I still want to say. Yuhuan Tianzuan, oh Yuhuan Tianzuan, Wushu's abilities are weak. I really can't provoke that person, so I can only trouble you to come down and deal with him personally. As he spoke, the young man looked in the direction that Jiang Zhengqing and the rest left. Then, as if taking a stroll in the park, he slowly walked in that direction. There's an old saying, pick the soft persimmons to pinch. Apart from waving flags and shouting battle cries, I seem to be able to help you get rid of these eyesores. Forget it, no matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat, so that you won't find another reason to say that I'm disobedient and disrespectful. The young man's speed seemed slow, but in fact, it was extremely fast. Even though Jiang Zhengqing and the rest flew at full speed, they never left the young man's line of sight. And the scariest thing was, Jiang Zhengqing and the rest were tailed, but among the 300 people, not a single one noticed this mysterious young man. They soon arrived at Daiyu Island. After Jiang Zhengqing and the rest entered the formation, they disappeared into thin air. At this moment, the young man looked at the vast ocean in front of him and couldn't help but mumble, "Is this the Big Dipper formation passed down from ancient times? No wonder I couldn't find the right place." As he spoke, the young man walked to the edge of the formation. Without seeing him do anything, a golden light screen appeared out of thin air. The young man stood outside the light screen and stretched his neck to look inside. Then, he walked in with a smile on his face. Then, Daiyu Island, which was like a paradise, was completely revealed in front of him. The young man had just arrived, so he couldn't find his way. He couldn't tell which island was the main one. Therefore, he went to the nearest island and strolled along the beach. After walking for a while, a group of children playing on the beach noticed him. The leader was a 17 or 18-year-old boy. The boy was quite alert. When he saw the young man's strange clothes, he frowned and called out to him. "Stop! Who are you?" Hearing that, the young man immediately stopped in his tracks. He first looked at the group of children in front of him, then smiled and replied, "Me? I'm Wuxia. You wouldn't know me even if I told you, so I think I might as well not tell you. You're an outsider." The boy looked at him in shock. Not long ago, there was a muddled incident where an outsider suddenly climbed Xianxia Peak. Therefore, Daoist Island was under martial law recently. Therefore, when the boy came back to his senses, he immediately turned to his companion and said, "Little Six, go to the guard hall and tell them we found an outsider." "Tell them to," the boy didn't finish his sentence. Because, the young man suddenly attacked. He just waved his sleeve casually, and a huge force sent more than 10 children flying. After flying for more than 10 meters, the children fell heavily into the sea. No one knew if they were dead or alive. Note. Chapter 376. Even though he was facing a group of half-grown children, the man who called himself Wuxia still attacked them. He did not seem to think that there was anything wrong with what he did. After sending the children flying into the sea, he even looked at the sea with disdain and muttered, "How rude." After that, he continued walking toward the depths of the island without looking back. As he went deeper into the island, he encountered more and more Jiang clan members along the way. However, regardless of whether they were male or female, old or young, Wuxia would raise his sleeve and send them flying with a slap. The only thing worth rejoicing about was, judging from the state of these people after they fell, Wuxia did not seem to have killed them. He only knocked them out. He did not walk very fast, but he walked straight toward the depths of the island. Therefore, he soon arrived at the square in the center of the island. This island was only one of the 17 sub-islands of Daoist Island. The people on this island were also from the branch clan. Finally, after Wuxia failed to knock everyone out with a slap, his actions had completely alarmed the entire Daoist Island. The sudden sound of the enemy attack bell was like a muffled thunder that exploded in the sky above Daoist Island. Bam! 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 Jiang Zhengqing and the others had just returned to Xianxia Peak. At this moment, they were gathered together to discuss their experiences. After hearing the sound of the bell, one of the heavenly beings immediately stood up and said with a frown, "The forbidden bell of Xianxia Island has rung. I'll go back and take a look first." After saying that, the ancestor of the branch clan, Jianghu, rushed out of the ancestral hall and flew toward Xianxia Island. After he left, Jianghu looked at the others with a puzzled expression and asked, "Mr. Chen has already reached an agreement with the ancestor. I don't think he'll be an enemy of the Jiang clan anymore, but other than him, who else in the world would dare to cause trouble on Daoist Island now?" Jianghu slowly scanned the entire place. However, everyone seemed to still be reminiscing about the spirit tide just now. Therefore, many of them even had faint smiles on their faces. However, they could not be blamed for being arrogant. After all, this was the most powerful time in the past 1,000 years for the Jiang clan. More than 300 celestials. The last time Chen Shi came to cause trouble, everyone was still in seclusion on Heron Island, so even Chen Shi had not truly seen the Jiang clan's foundation. Now that everyone had just returned from the spirit chi tide, all the celestials were gathered at serene Afterglow Peak, but there were still some ignorant fellows who dared to jump out and cause trouble. Isn't this the same as hanging an old man? Is he tired of living? Therefore, when Jianghu got up and went to Xianxia Island, the others completely forgot about this matter and continued to talk about the topic of cultivation in 2s and 3s. Because in everyone's mind, Jianghu alone was enough to suppress all the unbridled troublemakers. Xianxia Island was only a few kilometers away from the main island. Jiang Dihao soon arrived above Shushan Island and saw the troublemaker. But that person didn't have any intention of hiding at all. He just stood in the middle of the square and slightly raised his head to look at him. Seeing this, Jiang Dihao immediately flew into a rage and scolded sternly, "Which child dares to cause trouble on my Daoist island? Why aren't you surrendering now? Perhaps this old man can still spare your life." After saying that, Jiang Dihao flew directly toward that person, ready to take him down and slowly interrogate him. At this time, Wuxia, who had been standing in the middle of the square in a daze, finally seemed to have seen something interesting. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, "I've been holding back for so long, and now I can finally move my muscles and bones." While muttering, Wuxia raised his right hand. Then, a small yellow flag suddenly appeared in his hand. If one ignored the workmanship of the flag and the exquisite and complicated patterns on the flag, he really looked like a member of an elderly tour group, which was simply too low. Jiang Dihao didn't know why Wuxia suddenly had a small flag in his hand, and he only thought that this young man was playing a trick. That was because he didn't know that there was actually a magic treasure in this world, called Sumeru mustard bag. Born like a mustard seed, there's a Sumeru, and the heart like a speck of dust, there's a big world inside. The Sumeru mustard bag, also known as the interspatial storage bag, was a magic treasure that could only be refined by cultivators at the Dongshu stage. This magic treasure involved the profound meaning of the word void. It seemed to be only the size of a palm, but in reality, it could contain objects ranging from a few cubic meters to dozens of cubic meters. It was really a magical treasure that was necessary for traveling, killing, and arson. Chen Shi used to have one, but unfortunately, he accidentally lost it on his way back. If Chen Shi was here right now, and saw the treasure in this person's hands with her own eyes, even if he was as powerful as he would no longer underestimate his opponent. Instead, he would use 120% of his strength to fight the next battle. This was a very simple principle. One could roughly judge a person's worth from the way they traveled, and it was the same for cultivators. Only cultivators at the Dongshu stage could refine the Sumeru mustard bag, and the materials needed were very rare. Naturally, it couldn't be something that could be found on the streets. Baihong didn't have it, and neither did Shui Xiang. However, this young man named Wuxia had it. This also meant that, no matter what his cultivation was, his status in the outside world was higher than Baihong's. Chen Shi understood this principle, but Jiang Dihao didn't. Therefore, the moment he rushed towards Wuxia, Wuxia also waved the small yellow flag in his hand. At that moment, Jiang Dihao didn't sense any fluctuation of spiritual energy, so he was even a little curious about what this young man was doing. However, the next second, the whole ground cracked open. The floor of the square collapsed and shattered, and hundreds of earth spikes suddenly protruded from the ground. From afar, it looked like a hedgehog, and all the spikes on its body were aimed at Jiang Dihao in the air. Jiang Dihao didn't have time to react at all, and these hundreds of earth spikes all shot towards him. The speed of the earth spikes was very strange. Once they shot out, they covered the sky above the square. No! After a wail, Jiang Dihao's figure completely disappeared. The earth spikes turned into dust and leisurely sprinkled down, mixed with a particularly dazzling rain of blood. After the smoke and dust dispersed, this terrifying young man held the small flag, and then laughed and said to the Jiang clansman who rang the forbidden bell, "Ring it again, remember to ring it a little louder, or else I'm afraid they won't hear it." From beginning to end, his body didn't move at all. He just lightly waved the small flag in his hand, and with the power of the small flag, he instantly obliterated a celestial being. It was obvious that this small flag was also a magic treasure. But it was different from Baihong's flowing cloud sword and Shui Xiang's blue wave silk gauze. The small flag in Wuxia's hand had once appeared in the legends of Huaxia, and it had a well-known name, namely Chapter 377. The Central Wuxia Apricot Flag. If one added the Eastern Green Lotus Flag, the Southern Floating Flame Flag, the Western White Cloud Boundary Flag, and the Northern Jianghu Eagle Flag. These 5 flags formed a set of killing weapons that had once appeared in the myths and legends of Wuxia, the Khanate 5-element flags. Ever since Qianxi learned about the deeds of the ancient cultivators from the old man, he had a basic understanding of these myths and legends, and that was, these myths and legends were more or less based on evidence, so their reputation had been passed down from ancient times until now. Of course, the real Khanate 5-element flags was definitely not as exaggerated as the myths and legends described, but it was definitely considered an extremely powerful set of Dharma treasures. In addition, the Khanate 5-element flags was truly praiseworthy not because of its quality, but because it was a set. Because it was a set of Dharma treasures, not one. The Wuxia Apricot flag was only one of them. It could be freely disassembled and combined. This was the advantage of a set of Dharma treasures, but at the same time, it was also an unavoidable disadvantage of a set of Dharma treasures. Based on Qianxi's experience, after gathering all 5 flags, the Khanate 5-element flags could at least reach the quality of a supreme treasure, which was the same level as his Heaven Derivation sword. But because it was not pure enough, the Khanate 5-element flags could never be compared to the Heaven Derivation sword. But then again, a supreme treasure was still a supreme treasure. Even if the 5 flags were disassembled, just the central Wuxia Apricot flag alone should be able to reach the level of a high-grade spirit treasure. What was a spirit treasure? Above a Dharma treasure was a spirit treasure. When Qianxi had just returned, he had used 3 inferior Guanyin statues to refine 3 defensive Dharma treasures. But in a real sense, these 3 Guanyin pendants did not reach the standard of a Dharma treasure at all. At best, they could only be considered the lowest level of inferior Dharma artifacts. After all, at that time, Qianxi had no cultivation and no materials, so the Guanyin pendants that he forcibly refined would naturally not be good treasures. Dharma artifacts, Dharma treasures, spirit treasures, supreme treasures, and extremely rare Khanate supreme treasures. According to their quality, they could be divided into 9 grades. Grade 1 was the lowest, and Grade 9 was the highest. The reason why he didn't mention magic treasures before was because, it was impossible to find the materials to refine magical weapons on Earth. Refining magical weapons was an extremely difficult task, not to mention magical weapons with many wonderful uses. Bai Hong's sword, Qing Luan's spear, and Shui Xiang's damask could all be considered as high-quality magic treasures. Jiang Zhengqing's speed was very fast, and he almost instantly arrived above Shushan Island. The young man was still standing in the same place, looking up at the sky. Only Jiang Dihao was nowhere to be seen. But how sharp was Jiang Zhengqing's sense of smell? When he sensed that there was still a trace of blood in the air, Jiang Zhengqing was about to explode in anger. Obviously, Jiang Dihao had died in the hands of this person, so the 36 forbidden bells were rung on Shushan Island. TSK. Arrogant brat, die. Unlike the last time when he fought with Qianxi, Jiang Zhengqing underestimated his opponent and did not even have the chance to show half of his strength before he was smashed into the ground by Qianxi. This time, in a fit of rage, Jiang Zhengqing really showed his full strength. Therefore, when he let out a furious roar, the clothes on his body suddenly puffed up without any wind. His head of black hair also swayed crazily, as if he was in the eye of the storm. Surging true core energy gathered in his palms, and Jiang Zhengqing's hands suddenly became like 2 searchlights, exceptionally bright. Then, he slapped his palm toward the young man on the ground from afar, true 6 trigrams formula, mountain breaking all. A ray of golden energy suddenly shot out from his palm, as if it was the Buddha's palm. At this moment, Wuxia, who had been standing on the ground, looked as if he had seen something new. He squinted his eyes slightly, and then waved the yellow flag in his hand. When the yellow flag was waved, the ground shook. Two extremely thick mud pillars suddenly emerged from the ground, and then turned into two extremely thick arms. From bottom to top, they directly rushed toward Jiang Zhengqing in the sky. Jiang Zhengqing did not expect this young man's cultivation level to be so high. The mountain, breaking all that he had used all his strength, only shattered a corner of the mud pillars, and did not even slow down the opponent's attack. The two mud pillars were like the arms of a giant, hard and flexible at the same time. Chapter 378. It was hard to describe what it was like. It was just a pile of soil mixed with sand and stones, but it was like a living creature that could move freely and pounce on its prey. Jiang Zhengqing was obviously playing the role of the prey. The mud pillars emerged from the ground and shot into the sky like poisonous snakes pouncing on their prey. They were incredibly fast. The strength of the mud pillars surprised Jiang Zhengqing. While he was in a daze, the mud pillars had already reached him. After Jiang Zhengqing reacted, he immediately retreated into the sky. But the scary thing was, the speed at which the two mud pillars rose was even faster than his flying speed. In a flash, the mud pillars had caught up with Jiang Zhengqing. After all, this was already the second time he had been chased to the point of fleeing in such a sorry state. Jiang Zhengqing could not help but feel angry when he thought of all the things that had happened to him after his breakthrough. He was a heavenly being after all. It was fine when he faced Mr. Chen's flying immortal sword. But now, he was being chased all over the sky by two mud pillars. Did they really think that he was a heavenly being and a paper tiger? Jiang Zhengqing decided not to dodge anymore. He was ready to take the attack head-on. In an instant, Jiang Zhengqing was like a god descending to earth. The golden light around him shone brightly, almost illuminating half of Shushan Island. 6 trigram calming mind, concealment of spirit and qi. The moment the protective shield appeared, two mud pillars, one on the left and one on the right, smashed into Jiang Zhengqing's body. Bang! A loud noise reverberated in the sky above Daoist Island. The surging true core dispersed in all directions due to the violent collision, causing a strong gust of wind to blow across Shushan Island. Wuxia stood calmly on the ground and looked up at the situation from afar. He could not help but smile faintly. They were too weak. He did not even need to do anything. The power of the Wuxia apricot yellow flag alone was enough to massacre the entire Daoist Island. Wuxia thought about whether he should speed up as he turned to look at the heavenly beings of the Jiang clan. But just as he was about to wave the apricot yellow flag again, Jiang Zhengqing's slightly hurried roar suddenly rang out. This kid's Dharma treasure is too powerful. Retreat, retreat, retreat. It wasn't difficult to discern that his voice clearly carried a trace of shock and terror. Obviously, he was terrified by the might of the Wuxia apricot yellow flag. Jiang Zhengqing had quite a bit of prestige in the clan. After hearing his incessantly trembling shout, the Jiang clan celestials naturally did not dare to rashly advance. They could only hurriedly retreat several miles. At this time, Jiang Zhengqing turned into a stream of light and flew out of the square, rushing back to the crowd. If it wasn't for the ancestor bestowing me with a protective magic treasure a few days ago, I'm afraid I would have been dead by now. After Jiang Zhengqing safely returned to Jiang Yuankui's side, he panted heavily and said to Jiang Yuankui. As he spoke, Jiang Zhengqing even passed a jade pendant to Jiang Yuankui. This jade pendant was a protective magic treasure passed down from ancient times. If Jiang Yan hadn't been the first to break through to the celestial being realm, the old ancestor Jiang Yan wouldn't have given him this jade pendant. But now, he hadn't even warmed up the jade pendant when 4 or 5 extremely clear cracks appeared on it. Clearly, it was on the verge of breaking apart. The might of a single attack was actually so terrifying. At this time, if Jiang Yuankui still didn't understand the seriousness of the matter, then he would truly be the clan chief for nothing. Therefore, after exchanging a glance with Jiang Zhengqing, Jiang Yuankue abruptly raised his right hand and shouted, "The enemy is here. Everyone, please form the Yinyang 6 directions formation with me." After saying that, the Jiang clan celestials immediately formed groups of 6 and surrounded Shushan Island square in all directions. Over 300 celestials. How magnificent of a scene would that be? But Wuxia acted as if he was watching a monkey show. Even though he was surrounded, there was still a faint smile on his face. When the golden light of the serene afterglow peak soared into the clouds and the heavenly stars formation was completely activated, Wuxia slowly flew into the air under the gazes of the crowd. At this moment, the entire crowd was silent. Jiang Yuankue did not say anything. While everyone was waiting information, they were also silently examining the mysterious young man in front of them. Finally, Wuxia was the first to speak, breaking the silence. "I am the divine general of Tiandu, Wuxia. Under the orders of Yuhuan Tianzuan, I have specially come to condemn you all." No one answered him. Because when they heard the 2 words Tiandu, all kinds of complicated expressions appeared on their faces. Wuxia was not in a hurry to continue speaking. He only slowly swept his gaze over the crowd. But those who were swept by his gaze involuntarily lowered their heads, not daring to look at him. At this moment, Wuxia was simply like Kangxi in disguise. When he announced his name, everyone was stunned by his identity. Tiandu. For the Jiang clan's clansmen, that was a distant place, a place that they yearned for day and night. But now, under the lead of their ancestor, they took the initiative to go against Tiandu. Wasn't this a rebellion? You are merely descendants of sinners, but the divine ancestor thought of the bitter cold of the lower realm, so he spared you all and allowed you to ascend to the upper realm. In the blink of an eye, the divine ancestor has already passed away. You all do not know how to cherish the divine ancestor's kindness. Instead, you all think of ways to destroy the foundations of the divine ancestor and prevent the divine ancestor from opening. This crime is unforgivable. When Wuxia was alone, he would always talk nonsense like a crazy person. That was why their teacher always said that he would not grow up and was far from Baihong. But when he was serious, his body would erupt with a powerful aura that was enough to suffocate people. He just silently floated in the air. Every word he said was like a heavy hammer, smashing into everyone's chest. Everyone lowered their heads in silence. They were all waiting for their ancestor to speak, but for some reason, their ancestor did not do anything today. Only Jiang Zhengqing, after taking a deep look at the jade pendant in his hand, he spat at Wuxia angrily. Then, he scolded sternly, "Bah! Arrogant brat! After calling us sinners every time you open your mouth, dare I ask what our Jiang clan has done wrong?" Hearing this, Wuxia chuckled. Just as he was about to reply, Jiang Zhengqing continued, "Don't talk to me about the upper and lower realms. I have seen all the changes in the world. In the past, when Tiandu was strong, the Jiang clan could only become sinners and be trapped in this bitter cold. Didn't you all look down on the lower realm? Why are you here today? I think you know that too. Things are different now. Jinling's jade tree is famous, Qinhuai's waterside pavilion blooms early, but who knew that it would disappear so easily? I saw him build a vermilion tower, I saw him host guests, and I saw him collapse. I think you all are grasshoppers after autumn, you won't be able to jump around for long." Hearing this, the smile on Wuxia's face disappeared. After coldly looking at Jiang Zhengqing, Wuxia raised the apricot yellow flag in his hand again. Seeing this, the Jiang clan immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. As long as Jiang Yuankue gave the order, they would attack at the same time. They had to kill him instantly. Don't tell me you all really think that destroying the 5-directional holy palace and extracting the spiritual energy foundation can stop the gate of heaven from opening? That's wishful thinking. How foolish. Today, I will say this, because of what you all have done today, when the gate of heaven reopens, it will be the time when this world will be plunged into misery and suffering. When autumn comes, on the 8th day of the 9th month, all flowers will be killed. Chapter 379. Shoshan Island was in a mess. 300 celestial beings stood in formation. Everyone stared at the young man in the sky above the square from afar. Divine General. After hearing his last sentence, Jianghu Xianxia knew that he couldn't let him continue. There was no point in saying more. If a random Divine General was enough to make everyone cower in fear, wouldn't the Jiang clan go for wool and come home shorn? Therefore, Jianghu Xianxia hesitated for a while. Then, a fierce look flashed across his face. He walked past Jiang Yuankue and ordered everyone, formation. In that instant, the mountains rumbled, the valleys responded, and the wind blew. Dust swirled, and flags fluttered. How magnificent was the sight of 300 celestial beings! No matter how arrogant Wuxia was, facing such a large number of enemies, he had to be on full alert. For the first time, his body showed signs of true yuan fluctuation. Attack! Jiang Xianxia didn't give Wuxia too much time to prepare. After giving the order, he ordered everyone to attack with all their might. The surging Zhen Yuan gushed toward Wuxia like a torrential flood. Seeing this, Wuxia did not have any intention of running away. Because at this moment, he was the Divine General of Tiandu. He represented Tiandu to punish the sinners. If he ran away, where would Tiandu's face be? He could not back down from this battle. Come on, let me take a look, what gave you the courage to go against Tiandu? Wuxia was so angry that his hair and beard fluttered. He roared into the sky. The yellow flag in his hand was like a balloon. It expanded at a speed visible to the naked eye. At the same time, he quickly took out a pill from his sumaru mustard seed bag and stuffed it into his mouth. Xianyang Snow Melting Pill. This pill was a 9th-grade spirit pill. Its effect was that when a cultivator burned their essence blood, the effect of the essence blood would be greatly enhanced. This would allow the cultivator to explode with power far greater than before. The 9th-grade Central Wuji Apricot Yellow Flag in one hand and the 9th-grade Xianyang Snow Melting Pill in the other. Wuxiu's combat power was not inferior to Chen Shi's. Therefore, just as the Jiang clan's attack was about to arrive, the yellow flag in Wuxiu's hand exploded with a dazzling yellow light. The light was so bright that it almost dyed the entire sky. The 5 direction flags, Earth is supreme. Heaven Empress Earth, Heaven Empress, Heaven pure will not fail. With a wave of the flag, the entire earth trembled. Countless mud pillars suddenly extended from the ground and turned into a huge mud wall, surrounding Wuxiu. The attacks of the Jiang clan celestials all landed on the earth wall. Boom! 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 Dust flew everywhere, and sand and gravel flew everywhere. Huge explosions sounded in the sky above Shoshan Island one after another. That scene, it was like an air raid during World War II. Chapter 380. The old ancestor came. Once those words were said, everyone seemed to have been injected with chicken blood. A trace of indescribable excitement immediately appeared on their faces. After all, the old ancestor Jiang Yen was the current spiritual totem of the Jiang clan. Now that the Jiang clan raised the flag and wanted to become enemies with Tiandu, everyone was fighting fiercely. Only the old ancestor was nowhere to be seen, so it was inevitable that everyone would have doubts in their hearts. They could clearly choose to ascend to the higher realms, so why did they have to go against Tiandu? What was the reason? In reality, everyone knew very well why the old ancestor did this. But as long as the old ancestor did not appear, this question would always linger like a nightmare, forever shrouding everyone's heart. The most frightening thing in a battle was to lose morale. Luckily, the old ancestor finally appeared. The spiritual totem was erected again, and everyone's heart was filled with an extremely strong fighting spirit, causing the slightly dispirited morale to instantly soar to the peak. The majestic Jiang clan, flourishing without decline. The giant natives summoned by Wuxia had no life to begin with, and each one of them had to face the encirclement of dozens of celestials. Thus, under the continuous encirclement of everyone, the natives could only collapse one by one, turning into a pile of rubble and mud that fell to the ground again. Then, the celestials of the Jiang clan who had freed up their hands immediately turned towards Wuxia's direction, firmly surrounding him in the center. Back to Wuxia's side. As one of the best 1,000-year-old Go in Chen-Shi's heart, Jiang Yan was indeed very patient. He already knew everything that happened on the island, but he still did not immediately stand out to lead everyone to besiege Wuxia. Instead, he allowed everyone to suffer a huge loss at Wuxia's hands. He was Go, and also waiting. Just waiting for the moment Wuxia let down his guard, and then launching a fatal attack. For a smart person, 10,000 meaningless attacks were clearly not as effective as a single fatal attack. Just in terms of cultivation, Jiang Yan who had lived for over 1,000 years was clearly stronger than Wuxia. Thus, when he steeled his heart to launch a sneak attack, even with the protection of the Wuji apricot yellow flag, Wuxia was still unable to completely dodge the attack. But fortunately, Wuxia reacted very quickly. Furthermore, his clothes were defensive magic treasures. Therefore, the killing move that Jiang Yan had been holding back for a long time only managed to cut off a piece of flesh from his waist. Immortal cultivators did have the ability to regenerate broken limbs. But this takes time to recover slowly. It is impossible to be like Wolverine and Deadpool, whose bodies were clearly chopped into minced meat, but it didn't take long for them to return to their original appearance. Therefore, from Wuxia's injury to Jiang Fengyan's appearance, only a few breaths had passed. And at this time, Wuxia also used a spiritual pill to stop his injury. Bloodline possession, is it? Come on, then let me see, old man, other than sneak attacks, what else do you have? If Wuxia was an elegant young master before, then at this moment, he had already become an injured beast. So, after a roar, Wuxia picked up the apricot yellow flag and pounced directly at Jiang Yan. Seeing this, Jiang Yan did not retreat. Instead, he suddenly made hand signs and shouted loudly, "I am Jiang Yan, the ancestor of the illustrious clan, listen to my orders." Following his order, the Jiang clan celestials present all made hand signs one after another. Jiang Yan was at the core of the formation, and he felt hundreds of huge true essences constantly surging towards him. And the power of the yin-yang six directions formation was truly displayed after he, the backbone, appeared. Brilliant heavenly might, transform into divine thunder. 6 lines of space, rebuking without arrogance. In an instant, lightning appeared in the void, and heavenly thunder rumbled. Jiang Yan held the thunder in his hand, and his eyes were wide open in anger, as if a god had descended. Let me emphasize again. This is not an entertainment stay-at-home dad, nor a restaurant stay-at-home dad. This is returning from cultivation to become a stay-at-home dad. The theme determines that I can't be a daily life, and the main storyline is not changed at all, right? As a dignified soul formation cultivator, isn't it too ridiculous to go to the entertainment industry? I have my own main storyline, my own plot arrangement, but when it was published, because I was too concerned about the readers' comments, I lost myself. Before, I even mistakenly thought that cultivation and stay-at-home dad were conflicting. Until now, only then did I realize what was going on. I am not money, I can't make everyone like me. I can only do my best to write the story I want to write. If you think it is good, please recommend it to your friends after reading it. If you think it is not good, then please put it aside and find another book you like to read. I only hope that we can meet again in the future. Because this is only my first book, and definitely not my last. I have always been working hard to improve myself, hoping that I can write better in the future so that you will be satisfied. Sincerely. In addition, the part about Nian will not be lost, and will instead be written better, because when I think of the later plot, I feel that I have found the surging passion I had when I first opened the book. Since I am a cultivation stay-at-home dad, then I will bring out the characteristics of a cultivation stay-at-home dad. Don't mention the word stay-at-home dad, everyone will think of the same thing. Chapter 382. After explaining the situation to Qin Ruoying, Chen Shi set off for Daiyu Island. As soon as he got close to the waters around Daiyu Island, the sky suddenly darkened. Thunder and lightning intertwined, and torrential rain poured down. Thick fog rolled and rose from the surface of the sea, and the sea looked as if a tsunami was approaching. The waves surged over one after another, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were screaming, charging, and fighting. From time to time, waves soared into the sky, creating splashes of water that were more than 10 feet high. It was a spectacular sight that could not be described with words. Because the Jiang family had activated the protective array, even Chen Shi could not see what was going on inside. When he forcibly broke open a crack in the array and was about to enter, a surging and violent wave of spirit chi suddenly surged out from the crack. Chen Shi only sensed it briefly, but he frowned on the spot. This was the remnant aura after the great battle. At the same time, there were two distinct waves of true origin in this aura. This meant that, the battle had reached its climax, and both parties did not even bother to restrain themselves. That was why so much spirit chi had leaked out. Chen Shi could only hope that the old man could hold on for a while longer. After all, he was not here to collect the Jiang family's corpse. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but speed up his movements. With a flash, his entire person directly entered the grand formation. As soon as he entered the array, he saw a field of wildfire, thick smoke, and dilapidated walls. Daiyu Island. Where was the beautiful and spectacular sight that Chen Shi had seen when he first came here? Xiushan Island, which was located at the westernmost tip of Daiyu Island, had half a mountain cut off. Many Jiang family members who were lucky enough to survive could only hold on to broken logs and cry in the sea. The island was shattered, and the mountain was flattened. The wildfire lit up the forest, and thick smoke filled the sky. The 17 islands of Daiyu Island, there were only 1 or 2 that had not been affected by the great battle. It could be said that heaven and earth had lost their color, and all living things were crying out in grief. It was a scene of misery and suffering. Rumble. Rumble. The battle was not over yet. Every time Wuxia and Jiang Yan clashed, the shockwaves produced by the collision of their Zhen Yuan would instantly destroy everything around them. Thunder continued to rumble, and the earth trembled violently. This scene was very similar to the carpet bombing tactics of World War II. Thus, compared to the Jiang clan's people in the sky, the Jiang clan's people with shallow cultivations below were the ones who were truly living in fear. They would never know when the next wave of attacks would befall them. Although he didn't comprehend the true essence of the word void, for Chen Shi, this was already a great blessing. He even had a vague feeling that he might not be far from the insightful emptiness realm. Just one more step, as long as he understood the word void, he would be able to step into the insightful emptiness realm. Thinking of this, Chen Shi couldn't help but be overjoyed. He subconsciously raised his head to the sky and let out a long howl. His voice was full of joy. But this joy was obviously somewhat out of place with the atmosphere on Daoist Island. Wuxia and Jiang Yan's 5 senses were very sharp. Even though they were fighting fiercely, both of them noticed this extremely discordant howl. Mr. Chen? When Jiang Yan saw the figure in the distance clearly, he couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. One had to know that Jiang Yan had been reincarnated through possession. After several rounds of fierce fighting, his body was already somewhat overwhelmed and could explode and die at any time. When that time came, who in this huge Jiang clan would be able to stop Wuxia for a moment? Therefore, after seeing Chen Shi's figure, Jiang Yan was suddenly very excited. It had to be said that, the 3 words Mr. Chen did indeed have a strange magic power. After Jiang Yan blurted out these 3 words in a moment of excitement, the scene became strangely quiet. The Jiang clan celestials all looked in the direction their ancestor was pointing. Even Wuxia, he actually stopped fighting temporarily and turned to look in Chen Shi's direction. In an instant, Chen Shi had become the focus of everyone's attention. Seeing this, Chen Shi suddenly came back to his senses and finally remembered why he was here. Sorry, I'm late. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.